When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
In Walmart's Nouville, time was ticking away. Only a few nights left till the big holiday. But last-minute gifters had no need to worry. Walmart Express Delivery got their gifts in a hurry. From Nintendo to Nespresso and Lego flowers, they could check off their lists in as fast as an hour. All of Nouville, East, West, South, and North, could order gifts up until 5 p.m. on December 24th. So this holiday, just do as the Who's do. With gift delivery this fast, they all gasped. From Walmart? Who knew? Subject to availability, terms and fees apply.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like needing the protection of an offensive guard on the football field, but getting an elementary school crossing guard. Sure, they're both guards, but you can only trust one to keep your quarterback safe when the game is on the line. So don't settle for just any insurance when there's State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Hello, it's Martin here, and before we get started today, I thought I'd let you know that this episode of Haway the Podcast is sponsored by LiveScoreBet, a principal partner of Sunderland AFC. LiveScoreBet is the home of the total betting experience, combining LiveScore's real-time updates and stats with great odds and offers, all in one very slick and very easy-to-use betting app. For more information, visit livescorebet.com or download the LiveScoreBet app. Remember, it's for over 18s only, and please bet responsibly. For more information, go to gambleaware.org. Right, time for the intro music. Hello and welcome to Haway the Podcast, sponsored by LiveScoreBet. It's Martin here, and you join us for another edition of On This Week, where we take a look back at some of the wonderful and not so wonderful things that have happened on this week in the history of Sunderland AFC. And of course, I've got a couple of top gents with me to wander down memory lane. First of all, it's Andrew Smithson. Hello, mate.
Hello, mate, and same to you. You're a top gent yourself, and these are always one of my highlights of the week. Catching up and going through the old Sunderland stories.
No, it's always good fun, and to let listeners in on a little bit of a secret, we normally record this in the evening in Australia. In the evening in Australia and in the morning in the UK, and this week it's reversed. So usually Kelvin and Andrew are keeping me up past my bedtime, and this week I've got the opportunity to get my one back a little bit. So we'll see how long we go for today. And we've, of course, got Kelvin Beattie with us. Hello, Kelvin.
Oh, Jesus, you caught me out there. I'm spilling me cocoa all over myself, man.
There's some snazzy pyjamas you got on, mate.
Lounge pants, yeah, lounge pants. Evening.
Excellent. Evening, good morning, wherever it is, and whatever time it is that you're listening to this, we wish you all the very best. Now, Andrew, you left us with a quiz question at the end of last week's episode.
Correct. It was centred around the 11th of December 1999, which is when we had the first ever FA Cup tie at the Stadium of Light. So I was asking who were the opposition that day and what was the score. Do either of you gents fancy chipping in on that one?
I can't remember the score. I think it was at Portsmouth we played.
Got it in one. Perfect. Yeah, it was Portsmouth. It was only 1-0. It was a Gavin McCann goal. It was quite early on, and I think he's done well. He's kind of broke through the middle, got into the box, had a good finish. But I don't know if you remember, gents, I mean, December, it's the only time I ever recall the FA Cup third round being played before the new year. Seemingly, this was something the FA fancied because they wanted to kind of spread out the tournament a bit more and ease fixture congestion, but I don't think that lasted long, did it? I think we went back to the traditional January fairly sharpish.
Well, when was the controversy with Manchester United not playing in the FA Cup because they were playing in the World club championships or something.
That was the same season, and I wonder if that was in some way related to it. Maybe the FA might have thought, well, if we bring it forward, because I seem to think Manchester United were actually out of the country in the January, so that could very well have been another reason as to why games were before Christmas rather than after it. But yeah, for a lot of people, that was a real death knell for the competition when Man United started messing about like that.
Mm.
Well, I know we've talked about it before, haven't we? But, the FA Cup, even at this point, but certainly, when I was a lad in the late 80s, early 90s, and you're watching the FA Cup was the biggest thing to win. It was bigger than winning the league, I think. It was the most important trophy. Even when you look back and, you consider Sunderland win the FA Cup in 73, people who were maybe in the teens, 20s now look at that and go, FA Cup. In the context of today, it's not as big a deal, but at the time, that was the biggest thing you could win in club football. I would suggest. I would say people prioritize that as much as the league, if not more. And it was such a big deal. You had the coverage on TV going from 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning till after the game. You had the cameras in the hotels following the players on the bus. It was like the pinnacle of. If I remember going to a school fair when the Coventry-Tottenham final was on in '87, and the TV, everybody was crowded around the TV watching the FA Cup final. Nobody was looking at anything in the school fair. Everyone was just crowded around the TV watching the match. And it was just the biggest day in the football calendar. It's a shame how I know we've kind of gone off on a tangent already, as is our want, but it's a shame how the FA Cup's
It's
been
so hard
devalued.
to know how they claw that back, isn't it? How do they get back to a really exciting, viable cup competition?
Well, I think
it was.
It was brilliant. You've got to make from a business point of view, you've got to make the prize money and the prize of winning the competition as good, if not better, than winning the Premier League.
Yeah.
You've got to reduce the fixture congestion around it. So you've actually got weeks where you haven't got any other football apart from the FA Cup.
Yeah.
And you've got to, I suggest, though, if you got the right in terms of the boardroom being incentivized by it, then I think that filters down to the rest of the club. If the club as a whole don't take it seriously, the manager who's picking the team isn't going to, the players aren't going to, the fans aren't going to. You've seen the crowds that we get for FA Cup ties. People don't care. I think it's probably past saving in its current format. But anyway,
I've still got a lot of love for the FA Cup, and it really saddens me because I think you're right. We probably are past the point of no return. But this Portsmouth game, which was the answer to the quiz question, even then, December 1999, it was a lower crowd at the stadium for that cup tie, despite the fact this was 7 days after that massive Chelsea 4-1 win.
Yeah,
probably the most talked about game in Stadium of Light history. You imagine the place was buzzing and people were like, I can't get enough of watching the lads at the moment. Well, they clearly could, because the following week, when it's a different competition, the interest is just not there to the same level. And I would dearly love to see the FA Cup become as prestigious as it used to be, but whether it happens or not's another matter, sadly.
Well, it's interesting because sorry, go on, Kelvin.
I was just going to say, I always remember going to the semi-final in 1973 at Hillsborough, and one of the things that would definitely bring the fans at least back in, and I would say probably the TV wouldn't want to miss it, was the Dagenham Girl Pipers Band played before the start of the... Man, I'm telling you, that was really entertaining. So thinking about, can you remember when the RAF used to bring their Alsatians and run them over? Yeah, man.
Half time at Roker Park. That's a quality of entertainment you want, isn't it?
Kelvin, when you say you want to see the Dagenham girls, do you mean the original lineup, or are you expecting they've brought in some new recruits since 1973? Because bless them, some of them might be a bit doddery on their feet by now.
Yeah. Gee, you're on dangerous territory there,
Yeah,
boy.
that's a fair point.
Yeah, they were the only girl piper band in the whole wide world at the time. So it was a pretty unique kind of thing. Now, I think that kind of marketing, I think we've got the man, actually, when you think of the job that David Bruce has done. We've got the man for thinking up that kind of stuff, that might drag people in. You might want to give us a ring. I'm full of ideas like that.
Well, if David Bruce is listening, you can get in touch and we will connect you with Kelvin for all of his marketing genius and insights into pre and post and mid-match entertainment. But it links us really nicely because this was the first time, this FA Cup game was the first time we played an FA Cup tie at this stage of the competition, this early, since 1887. Obviously, in 1987, we'd played the FA Cup first round because we've been relegated to Division 3. Now, it links us nicely because in 1888, now if you're looking back to where the FA Cup started to go wrong, 1888, on December the 8th, we declined to play an FA Cup tie against Sunderland Albion. Now, we talked about this a little bit last week because there was a friendly that we'd organised with them instead. But we got drawn in Sunderland Albion. We said we don't want to play that because the gate receipts will be too meaningful for them. It'll give them too much of a financial boost, so we're going to withdraw. So the anticipated big crowd that tie would generate, the directors of Sunderland said, "No, we don't want to give our rivals that leg up, so we'll pass. Thank you very much." So, you could argue the decline of the FA Cup goes all the way back to us. Another pivotal thing that Sunderland have done in football.
Big apologies to Manchester United. They've carried the can for spoiling the FA Cup for years now, and all along it was Sunderland instead.
We will crack on with December the 8th. So 1956, we played Burnley at home. We beat them 2-1, and Charlie Cannonball Fleming, who we've talked about in this podcast before, scored twice to give us that victory. Now, there's an interesting game in 1962. So when people say the name Jimmy Montgomery, you automatically go back to the FA Cup final. If you're a little bit more inclined, you might go back to the semi-final. If you ask Monty what his best game is, he will say it's a game in Huddersfield at Leeds Road in 1962. Now, Sunderland won 3-0, and Brian Clough got 2 goals just after half-time, and George Mulhall got another one just after the hour to give us that victory. But Monty apparently played an absolute blinder, especially in the first half, pulling off save after save after save. And yeah, Monty said this, in his opinion, is his best ever game. He was 19 years old at the time. And I'll just read a little bit from the match report in the Journal on the Monday. It said, "It's true to say that Brian Clough's goals put Sunderland on the path to victory over Huddersfield on Saturday. And it is even more true to say that had it not been for 19-year-old goalkeeper Jimmy Montgomery, the opportunity would never have presented itself. Since this youngster won a senior place last February, he has won acclaim all over the country, and rightly so. But I have never seen a better display from anyone than that which he put up at Leeds Road." And it's one of those where you can get a bit of an impression from newspaper reports and reading about it. It's one of those you would love to have seen in real life, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
And for Monty to say that's his best ever game, looking back through all of the games he played for Sunderland and further afield, that's some accolade for that game and that performance.
Yeah. What a place to do it as well, Leeds Road. Yeah.
That's quite apt, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
The snippet you read out from the paper there, Martin, just amazing. I mean, imagine picking that paper up after the game and reading that about yourself. You'd be so proud of that. I would take issue with the point that, did the journalist say it was the best performance he'd ever seen? Was that the quote? I think that was the wording.
I have never seen a better display from anyone than that which he put up at Leeds Road.
I've never seen a better display. There is a fella who has not yet had the chance to see the Dagenham Pipers. Bless him. He might have revised his opinion. But no, just Montgomery, the footage I've seen of him he was a stunning goalkeeper. So for him to be able to pinpoint a game where he was at his very best, that must have been one hell of a performance.
It's funny you mentioned Monty. You know, I met with one of our fellow writers recently, a lad who I've just spoken to on social media, and we realised we're going to be a couple of miles away from each other up in Alnwick recently, and John and I what we thought we'd do was because there's a lot of focus on the Stadium of Light history with Sunderland, we were quite keen to look at your best team from the 60s, your best team from the 70s, and your best team from the 80s, and we thought we'd have a little bash at that. You can imagine what a joy, how difficult that is on the top 10 pods. Well, in real life, it isn't any easier. We didn't get very far, and we were 2.5 hours on by the time we'd finished. But what was really interesting, and what I guess I did know it, but it was just when you're sitting speaking to somebody else about it who was there during that same period, what would set a little ground rule that you couldn't a player couldn't appear in more than one era's team. Right. So, but Jimmy Monty, he was the goalkeeper for 2 of those eras.
Yeah,
so
you'd have to give Monty a pass, I think, wouldn't you?
we had to just pass him out. The 2 of us were looking at each other. We're saying, "No, that's a good rule. That's a good rule. You can't appear in more than one era." Who we're going to have for the 70s if we don't have Jimmy Monty? It was slim pickings, or not so slim if you think one of them was Barry Siddle, but just in terms of class goalkeeping, class saves, and then things like fitness and longevity, what a blooming star he was. Yeah.
So, Kelvin, for people listening who didn't see Monty play, in sort of modern terms, who would you compare him to? What sort of goalkeeper was he? If you look at the Sunderland goalkeepers over the last, 15, 20 years, what was he like?
Do you know, it is a question I've been asked before that, and it's quite hard to find a niche for him because goalkeeping's changed a bit now as well, Was he definitely wasn't a tall, rangy, he wasn't really a Tony Coton or that kind of goalkeeper. In many respects, the guy the great goalie that followed him, them two were really, really similar in attributes. Chris Turner and him, if you saw Chris Turner, Tony Norman on his good days, there was some similarities. Monty's reflexes, it's a cliche, isn't it, for goalkeepers? Cat-like reflexes.
Yeah.
But he was that's what he had. He was like a startled cat sometimes with these and there used to be a thing people used to say, some people cruelly used to say that he was long-sighted. And the reason why he made so many great saves was he wasn't seeing the ball until the last moment and then diving. But I didn't hold with that. He just had these fantastic reflexes. And so I cannot really nail a one after Tony Norman who would be as close to him. He was a lithe, kind of lad. He wasn't like really beefy. He was lithe. He was his height wouldn't have been what would have knocked you out either. There were lots of outfield players that were much taller than him. So it was just his all round ability, his reflexes, his ability to change. I mean, I've written about it. I know others have that saw him play. He could change direction in midair. He'd be diving one way, the ball would rebound, and he just had this ability to move himself in the opposite direction. It was fantastic reflexes that he had. And I haven't seen too many goalkeepers since then who were like that. I've seen goalies whose positioning's really good,
Yeah.
and who get all their angles right. And, and I think we've been blessed really to have some good practitioners. Sorensen, I always thought was a good goalkeeper. Craig Gordon, I always thought was a really, really good goalkeeper. Tommy Sorensen probably, I'd say of the modern Stadium of Light keepers would probably be he would probably just pip Craig Gordon for me. But we've been blessed to have some good goalkeepers. And some of them, I guess you would say, were similar in style. But I would say the closest for me, to Jimmy Monty in style would be Chris Turner. And of course, you lads never really saw him play, did you? Yeah.
No.
Did you see, Kelvin, a couple of weekends ago, the home game against Bournemouth? Chris Turner was a guest of the club, and when he got announced on the PA system, I did think of you, and I was hoping that you'd caught that and was giving Chris Turner a round of applause, because I know he was a favourite of yours.
He did the halftime draw, didn't he?
Yeah.
That's what he was there for. And didn't he drop the box with the tickets in? I'm teasing.
He caught it again before it hit the ground. So just
I was going to say he never dropped the. It probably hit him on the back of the head as he was looking for it, if it had money in it. Teasing. I'm teasing.
It's all good. We'll move on. 1979, Claudio Marangoni made his debut against Cardiff in a game that Sunderland won 2-1. Pop Robson got a goal for Sunderland, and there was no own goal from the Cardiff keeper Davis, which gave us the victory. 1990, now this was a game at White Hart Lane. Sunderland drew 3-3. It was a season that we'd gone up under Dennis Smith, and losing Leeds became a bit of, well, it was quite synonymous with how that season sort of panned out, wasn't it? We lost the lead on a few occasions. Inspector Clouseau springs to mind, famously. We drew this game 3-3 at Spurs. Now, we were 2-0 up in the first half. Colin Pascoe and Peter Davenport had both scored to put us 2-0 up. And this was Terry Venable's Spurs side. Gaza, Lineker. It was a really exciting side to watch, a great side to watch. Paul Walsh got a couple after half-time to pull it back to 2-2. Colin Pascoe scored again on 75 to put us 3-2 into the lead. And in the 90th minute, Gary Lineker scored the equaliser to break our hearts on that day. But that was a fantastically good performance, and it was one of those games where you just deserve much more than you actually got from it, because we played so well that day. 2003, we played a game at Coventry. This was live on TV. It was a 1-1 draw in the second tier under Mick McCarthy. Stuart Downing was on loan at the club at the time. He scored for us. I think that was one of the last games he played for us. But I think people will remember this game because it was a game that Colin Healy suffered a really horrible leg break. And that pretty much ended his career with it. I know he came back and famously broke his leg in training again after he came back. And he did go on to play football again, but he looked a really good player in that short spell that he had before he suffered this horrible injury. And it was such a shame that it was the end of his career at Sunderland, really, wasn't it?
Yeah. I really did like the look of him. I thought it was blooming unfortunate, really, not just for him, but for us as a team at the time.
It was.
Aye. No, he was a good. I thought he was going to do good business for us. No accounting for those injuries, though, is there?
No,
Yeah.
he was very highly
It's-
rated, wasn't he? I think we got him from Celtic,
Yeah.
and even though we didn't
Yeah.
have much money at that point, he was like the big signing, the big name signing. I think he was very much thought of as Roy Keane's replacement for the Republic, wasn't he? In the Republic of Ireland first team, and such a shame he suffered that injury. We're going to go back to 1973 on the 8th of December because it was a game at Roker Park, Kelvin. Sunderland played Aston Villa.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Just hopefully just a little quickie with this game. I was actually at this game, and we beat a canny Villa team on the day. If you look at the players that played for Villa, you've got characters in there who would, some of whom would form the nucleus of the European Cup winning team and a league championship team. So, and I remember that as a really good game. But there's a couple of things about that game, a couple of players playing in there who were really interesting. So if I was to say to you, in 1966, when England got to the World Cup final.
They got to the World Cup final.
When the referee, Gottfried Dienst, the Swiss referee, blew his whistle, to start the game, who was the first Englishman to touch the ball? Because he played in this game.
Played, presumably, was an Aston Villa player.
Aston Villa.
Then. Yeah.
Who'd
maybe played at the World Cup final.
The first Englishman to touch the ball after the referee.
This is a trick
blew his whistle.
Yeah, Kelvin's got that little smirk on his face that suggests he's bowled us a bit of a googly there, hasn't he, Martin?
Hasn't he? Probably somebody in the crowd or something.
Aye. Any clues? Was it the ball boy? Was it a ball boy? Something like that?
Yes.
It was a ball boy.
It was.
Oh, good shout.
Good shout, okay. Andrew. Good shout. Good shout. So,
okay.
Yeah, Wolfgang, the ref blows his whistle. Wolfgang Overroth, a ball-playing West German, he tries to slide a long pass out to Helmut Haller. The ball goes out, and it's grabbed by a ball boy who hands it back to Martin Peters, and Martin Peters takes the throw. Right? That ball boy was the first Englishman to touch the ball in there. And his name, believe it or not, he played in this game because he was the sub for Aston Villa. And his name was Neil Rioch. And he was Bruce Rioch's brother.
Yeah, right.
And of course,
really?
And he was an England youth international, Neil. But his brother was captain of Scotland at one time. So they were a split, a mudblood family, as I like to call that kind of thing. He was the first Englishman to touch the ball in the World Cup final. Yeah, nice one, wasn't it? He was his career. He didn't have the career his brother had, but he did get on in this game. He was the sub and got on, just a young lad when he got on. The other fella that's quite interesting in this game, and I'm hoping there are people out there that can remember this lad. We had a sub playing for us, sitting on our bench this day called Danny Hegan. Does that name mean anything to Andrew's nodding his head?
I've heard the name before, yeah. Don't know much about him, though.
Yeah.
I see. Is he the one who'd been with us as a youth and then returned later in his career?
Yeah. You're on form. What a start you've made to tonight's episode, Andrew. Well,
late night
done.
podding obviously suits me better than the early mornings.
Yeah. You've parked that broomstick and you're flying. So Danny Hegan, he was with us. He came from Albion Rovers in 60-61, I think it was. And we paid $6,000 for him, Alan Brown, and he was scouted by Charlie Ferguson and Charlie Ferguson's Scottish colleague, a guy called Tom Rutherford. Danny Hegan was born and brought up in Coatbridge, where a number of our players from the 60s came from. Billy Hughes was from there as well. Chico Hamilton, young Chico, he was from there. He came along a little bit later. But Danny Hegan, anyway, Albion Rovers, inside forward he was, came, never got a game, and also had quickly developed a little bit of a reputation for being a bit of a carouser. And Alan Brown, he was having he didn't have any truck with that kind of thing, Brownie, if he found out about it, and he was sold to Ipswich very, very quickly, I think, off to Ipswich. Played quite a few games for Ipswich, about over 200. Then was sold to West Bromwich Albion, and each time the reason why he gets sold is there's a little bit of shenanigan going on. I don't think he was anybody ever came in and headhunted him. But I will tell you, all the while what follows him, wherever he goes, he plays for Ipswich, West Bromwich Albion, he plays for Wolves. And he actually plays for Wolves in the UEFA Cup final. The Wolves got to the UEFA Cup final in 1972, and he's in that team.
Yeah, right.
So he's got potential. He's got football in him, but he's also got the carousing that cuts across his career a bit. So he's with us in 1960-61, never gets a game. We buy him from Wolves now. The couple of, I think he was told that his contract wasn't going to be renewed because of some of what he'd been, his extracurricular activities, and but Sunderland come in and in 1973, and it's Bob Stokoe that comes in and says, "I will have a bit of that. We could just do with a bit of that for our team." He's a Northern Irish international. He had a mudblood connection in his family as well, so he could have played for Scotland or Northern Ireland. He'd 7 caps, I think, for Northern Ireland over the course of his career. But he comes to Sunderland, and he's on the bench for this game. He in that second spell, I think it's 6 games altogether that he actually plays over the time that he's with us, and then he's released, and he plays a bit of time, and he goes to South Africa. He comes back. He plays for a team called Coleshill Town in the Midlands near Birmingham. He plays for them till about 1978, and then he retires and goes to coach football at Butlins for a number of years. I think that's about 11 years that he goes and does that. It just sounds like a character and a half. He sounds like a good lad to go for a night out with as well, but also obviously likes his football because he sticks in at that, and he wasn't averse to sort of trying his hand at stuff, because he worked at Edgbaston at the cricket ground for 3 years, doing all sorts of odd jobs, and because it gave him a chance to watch the cricket as well. So just he sounded like a good lad to me. And unfortunately, what I remember about him, because he was on the bench for this game, I remember looking at him and sitting in there, and in all honesty, he didn't look like a footballer. Yeah, he looked like a lad who was heading for a night out. If he'd quite long hair, and he looked like he was heading for a night out. So a good-looking lad he was. He looked a bit of a rascal to me. So he just a little story about two lads who played in that game. I mean, it was a great game of football. And there were some great players on show, but Danny Hagan and Neil Rioch seem to catch my attention.
The two subs.
Sorry.
Excellent. No, that's what we're all about, getting the little oddities and the little side stories, the things that people don't necessarily know. And I certainly never knew much about Danny Hagan, and I would never, ever, ever have picked up the little nugget of gold that you produced with Neil Rioch. So yeah, brilliant stuff.
It's just to show you that I do pay some attention to what the English football team are up to.
Right, on that note, we will take a very short break. We'll be back soon.
Here's my 30-second story with Guinness. As soon as my sister and I get home for the holidays, we don't even unpack. We head straight to our pub. The bartender already knows our order, Guinness and fries. We laugh all night, catch up with old friends, and walk home with faces sore from smiling. It's one of my favorite nights of the year. That was my 30-second story with Guinness.
Guinness Draft Stout. Please enjoy responsibly. Imported by Diageo Beer Company, USA, New York, New York.
I know every operating
At my
system like
last
the
job,
back of
in
my
my
hand.
current role, I
When it comes to
25 years of experience and have worked with several people from your company. I've been recognized for my passion. My team is everything.
LinkedIn delivers candidates who rise above the rest. With an up-to-date view into shared connections, skills, and interests you won't find anywhere else. See why 86% of small businesses who post a job on LinkedIn get a qualified candidate within a day. Post a job for free at linkedin.com/achieve. LinkedIn, your next great hire is here.
Welcome back to Haway the Podcast, sponsored by LiveScore Bet. And before the break, we were talking about things that happened on the 8th of December on this week in Sunderland history. And if you were listening last week and the week before, actually, we covered a little bit about a couple of League Cup ties that Sunderland played against Exeter City in the late 80s, Andrew. And you were just going to follow up on some of the things that happened subsequently after a big night out in the Exeter clubland, I think.
Yeah, Danny Hagan might have been part of the drinking crew by the sounds of it. He obviously liked a wild night out. We're missing Chris, aren't we? Bless him. Chris can't be with us for this record, but Chris recently spoke about the shenanigans, which was a lovely word Kelvin used earlier, shenanigans that a couple of Sunderland players got up to after a cup game in Exeter. I knew a little bit about the players being arrested, and of course there was all of this fallout in the press. But as Chris was giving us the extra detail, I was thinking, do you know, I never knew what came of this. We all know the daft laugh at the start of John Kay reputedly moonwalking or jumping across the tops of people's cars or whatever daft thing it was meant to be. But I'd never known what came of it. So I had a bit of spare time, and I went into the paper archives to see what was going on. There was 4 players who got arrested in total after this night out in Exeter. So it was John Kay, Paul Williams, Gordon Armstrong, and Tim Carter. This was all in the aftermath of that League Cup game where we'd fought back from 2-0 down against lower division Exeter City. We'd got ourselves out of jail. We'd managed to take them to a replay. The players then decide to hit the town. At the end of the night, those 4 lads jump in a taxi back to the team's hotel, which was called the Solston, in a tiny town a few miles outside of Exeter called Ottery St. Mary. Now, I've had a little look at this little town. It just looks like such a quaint little part of the world. It looks beautiful. One of those areas where somebody snapping the aerial of a car would be like the crime of the century. You know, you'd have neighbours pulling back the net curtains and seeing what was going on. I think it was quite a sleepy place. I don't think it was used to a load of raucous footballers there getting arrested in the early hours. So yeah, the players were picked up by the police, having got back to their hotel. It meant that on the morning of the 30th of November, Sunderland's flight back to the northeast had to be delayed because the players hadn't been released from their cells yet. When Sunderland landed at Newcastle Airport, there were a canny few reporters waiting for them, wanting to try and get a bit of a scoop and find out a few details. Very sensibly, the players just put their heads down, kept their mouths shut, and just got back to their individual cars. Some of them jumped on the team bus and just got out of there as quickly as they could. They knew that there was a bit of a storm being brewed about this. I think Chris at the time said, really, in the grand scheme of things, it was hardly, it was hardly some sort of like underworld crime syndicate. It was just a couple of lads that had been involved in a few high japes on a night out. Very quickly after that, it becomes apparent that Tim Carter and Gordon Armstrong were not involved at all. They had been drinking separately. They had been somewhere else in Exeter, and just unfortunately for them, ended up sharing a taxi back with John Kay and Paul Williams back to the team hotel. So they were just unfortunately dragged into this. Dennis Smith was really keen to exonerate them and make it clear that at no point had they done anything wrong. The police backed this up soon after as well and confirmed there'd be no action against those two. So they, were presumably happy to be well out of it. They've got away with it. Kay and Williams, however, are both slapped with absolutely massive internal fines by the club. Smith was not impressed with those two one little bit. The case, they were told, was going to take place on the 15th of January, although it ended up being adjourned and didn't take place until the end of the month. It took place on the 29th of January in the end. This was in the era when footballers would have their full addresses printed in the papers. So not only are they in court and everybody knows their business, we now find out that Williams was living in Low Fell at a place called Glenbrook Terrace. Although on the day of the case, the prosecution actually withdraw the charges against him. There's nothing more said about it. I have no idea what's gone on there and why he's managed to get away with it scot-free, because John Kay seems to be basically taking the fall for everything that's happened. His address was printed as being in Burnmoor. He did plead guilty. He was ordered to pay compensation of £730. He had to pay costs of £35 and was fined £250 for each car that was damaged in the fallout. The person representing Kay and Sunderland was a fella called Kevin Gray. He was quoted as saying, "He is a likeable, personable young man," this is John Kay, this is, "without an ounce of malice in him. And he is imbued with a deep sense of team spirit, which makes this incident more and more difficult to comprehend." Now, I mean, to be fair, John Kay doesn't have an ounce of malice in him, but we've all heard stories of him getting up to hijinks on nights out. He was some boy, by all accounts. And imbued with a deep sense of team spirit made me laugh, because I think he'd maybe imbibed a few spirits as well leading to this.
Some of them non-malicious tackles that he used to put in on the pitch.
I was going to say, if a few wingers might dispute some of those sentiments, mightn't they?
He did it with a smile on his face.
Yeah. I wondered if Mr. Gray was speaking slightly tongue-in-cheek. I mean, bless him, John Kay's an absolute legend. But those comments did make me laugh. I'm glad I did a bit more digging into the eventual fallout for it. But bless him, the saddest thing about this whole scenario, Kay, who had been, quote, drinking lager. That was I think one of the real reasons behind all of this. I mean, dear me, a 20-something footballer drinking lager is just wow. I mean, Danny Hagan must be shaking his head at the thought of that. Bless him. All of this, he's had his name in the papers, he's had his address in the papers, he's severely out of pocket. The 29th of January, when he had this court case, that just happened to be his 26th birthday.
Oh,
bless
really?
him. So what a poor fella. Who could have thought that a random night out at the other end of the country a few months before was going to see him hit so hard in the pocket on his birthday? I mean, that is rubbing salt into the wounds, I think, for John Kay. But it was just one of them. I knew the outset of the story.
Yeah.
Was always wondered how it concluded itself.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you listen to the comments from his legal representative? It sounds as if he's kind of taken the fall for the team. And, if you look at that situation, if Paul Williams, young lad, just coming through, and you wonder whether John Kay has just gone, it's all right, I'll sort it out, I'll take the rap, I'll stand up, I'm the... Because he was one of the leaders in the dressing room, wasn't he, at the time?
He was, and he was a good lad, John Kay. Team spirit was important to him, all jokes aside. And also, as a result of this, I don't remember John Kay dropping out of the first team picture.
No.
So maybe he's thought, oh, listen, Paul Williams, he's a young lad, he's trying to make his mark. He probably would be more damaged by a negative story than I would be. So yeah, maybe he has very valiantly put his hand up and said, listen, throw the book at me and we'll all move on. But for it to happen on his birthday, man, what a proper kick in the teeth. I dare say he probably stayed off the lager that night. He might have learnt his lesson after all of that.
He might have been hoping for some money and some birthday cards to go towards the multiple fines that he got on that day.
What do you want for your birthday, son? Well, I've got this letter from the court here. You couldn't see to that, Mum and Dad, could you? You couldn't pay some of these costs, could you?
Dear.
Just put a tenner in the card for us, that'll be right. Right, we'll move on to December the 9th, and in 1893, Johnny Campbell scored his 100th goal for the club in only his 99th game, which is an absolutely incredible goal-scoring record, isn't it? Now, this was a game that we played at home against Blackburn. We actually got beat 3-2, so Johnny Campbell scored a goal, but we got beat 3-2. And it was our only home defeat in 6 years, pretty much, or just under 6 years. We played 92 League and FA Cup games, and this was our only home defeat in that time. That would have been a pretty good... we've had some lean periods of home fixtures recently, well, in more recent times, haven't we? But to go almost 6 years without only seeing one defeat, it would have been a pretty happy place to be going to every Saturday, wouldn't it?
Oh, brilliant. Yeah.
Can you imagine being the poor soul? That was the only game they managed to get to. They work Saturdays or something. They finally get a day off. They go to the match, and that's the one they go and see.
I feel sorry for the kid who got brought along. That's your first game. Right, you're never going again.
Yeah, Jonah. Yeah.
1961, Sunderland played Swansea Town at Roker Park and beat them 7-2. The hat-tricks for Brian Clough and Ambrose Fogarty. The game was 2-1 at half-time, and Sunderland ran away with it in the second half. Harry Hooper got the other goal on that day for Sunderland. 1969, sorry, Andrew, go on, mate.
I was just going to point readers in the direction of a website article on that game. I've just finished typing it up there before we started recording. So, yeah, as Martin says, it was a big win for us. But if you fancy a few more details on that one, make your way over to, what is it, rokerreport.com?
.sbnation.com.
Oh, dear me, that's pretty embarrassing, isn't it? I'm not going to get the gig for doing any advertising when I don't even know the website. It's because it's on my shortcuts, of course. I never need to type in the full address.
Well, you just need to search for Roker Report and it'll crop up. But yes, if you go to the website on the 9th of December, that article will be up and be splendidly written as usual by Andrew. 1969, there was a youth team game at Roker Park. Sunderland played England youth team, and Tony Towers was in the England side. He actually scored a hat-trick on that day, and Sunderland got beat 6-0. It was the Sunderland youth team got beat 6-0 by England youth team. 1995, this was in Peter Reid's promotion season, the first promotion season, and it was a bit of an outlier in terms of our games and our results that season, because that season was really built on a very solid defence, nicking a goal or two. This game we played Millwall, and Millwall were top of the league at the time. We absolutely stuffed them, and we beat them 6-0. Craig Russell got 4. And how many goals did Craig Russell get that season? Did he get 11 goals or 12 goals or something like that? He was top scorer that season. He didn't get too many. And 4 of them came in this game. Martin Scott had opened the scoring with a penalty, and Phil Gray got the other goal. And of course, they released this game on video, on VHS. I remember buying it from a newsagent in concert. The Lion Tamers, it was called. But Millwall, I seem to remember, went on a terrible run after this game. They, I think they ended up getting relegated.
They did. They were league leaders at the start of the game, weren't they?
They were top of the league when we took them on. That's right. And they fell away terribly. We went to the top of the league instead of them. We overtook them. It was a top of the table clash. We were second. They were first. And you go, this is going to really tell us where we are this season. Yeah. Absolutely turn them over. Mick McCarthy was Millwall's manager.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
And obviously that didn't leave him with too many fond memories of Roker Park. There were 2 players with Sunderland connections in the Millwall team that day. One former Sunderland player and one future Sunderland player. Any ideas?
I'd back myself to get these 2, so I'm going to let Kelvin have a little go, because I'm running the risk of...
because you can see the look on my face that I haven't got a baldy clue.
No, I'm running the risk of spoiling it, because I've got a couple of quiz questions right already, and I want to retire on 100% record. Right. But I think I know these ones.
Was Alex Ray one of them?
Alex Ray is one of them, absolutely, yeah.
Very good, aye.
He's a future Sunderland player, so Millwall had somebody playing in defence for them at centre-half. It wasn't Mick McCarthy. Mick McCarthy, I think, played in the 6-2 game a season or 2 earlier.
Yeah. Same initials as Alex Ray, I believe.
Indeed, yes.
Ooh. You've got me, though.
Anton Rogan.
Ooh.
Anton Rogan was in defence. He got taken off just after the hour mark with Sunderland 4-0 up.
Do you reckon he ever got asked, what was the best Sunderland game you ever appeared in? He says, it was a 6-0 win for Sunderland, and just leaves it at that. Yeah. Doesn't mention anything else about it.
I was going to say, do you think he was trying to curry flavour with the Sunderland fans by letting us in there? But
you wouldn't do a thing like that, would you, Kelvin?
I wouldn't. I'm not going to say that, because pretty dumb thing to say, really. But
1999, we talked about Kevin Ball's last game for Sunderland a couple of weeks ago away at Watford, and on this day, he was transferred to Fulham after more than 9 years on Wales. So he got his testimonial, didn't he, at the start of his 10th season. He left halfway through that. 200 grand, he went to Fulham, and I think he served them and Burnley pretty well for a few years after that as well. A year later, Sunderland played Middlesbrough at the Stadium Light. This was the game where Mickey Gray scored the winner. I think it was with his right foot even. He sort of came in from the left-hand side and scored in the North End stand to give us that 1-0 win. 2006, under Roy Keane, we played a game against Luton at the Stadium Light. Now, this is notable for a couple of reasons. Martin Fulop had just been signed from Spurs, and Ben Annick had gone to Spurs, and Fulop we got in sort of part exchange. I thought Fulop was an excellent goalkeeper. He made his debut on this day. He conceded after just 5 minutes to Luton. Luton went 1-0 up, but Daryl Murphy and David Connolly scored the goals to give us the 2-1 win. But the other notable thing was there was a player in the Luton side who really stood out that day and really played well. And Roy Keane thought, I need to sign him. Carlos Edwards was playing for Luton. And I think by the time we next played the Stadium of Light, Carlos Edwards was in the Sunderland side. Keane pounced shortly after this game anyway and got Carlos Edwards into the team. And I think that was a really pivotal thing. Carlos Edwards and Johnny Evans, of course, arriving a few weeks later, really sort of turned things around for Keane. He'd done pretty well up to this point with getting the team away from the bottom of the table. But I think Edwards' arrival and that of Evans as well really kind of gave us that extra spark that we needed to go on that fantastic run that we did to win the title.
He was a good player. He was a good player, Carlos Edwards.
I really liked Edwards.
I really liked him. I'd always just thought it was the Dwight York connection that kind of pulled him in, but you reckon Keane saw him in that game, and
I think Dwight York would have had something to do with it. Absolutely, because then Sterling John arrived as well, didn't he, later on? But I remember this game, Edwards was superb. And he really gave us a tough time. And when you look back, like Carlos Edwards was a winger that had a bit of everything. He worked really hard. He had pace. He could go past the player. He could cross it. He could shoot, as we saw on a number of occasions later on this season. He scored some fantastic goals, didn't he? The Burnley one stands out. I think he got a few others as well. And he just had a bit of everything. It was such a shame when he got into the Premier League. He picked up an injury pretty early on that he never actually got to play that much in the Premier League for us. But he was an exceptionally good player, and he could have been an even better player for us, I think.
You're dead right. He was exceptional for us, and he's one of those where then when you look at the stats, you realise he didn't play anywhere near as many games as his memories would have you believe, because like you say, he was involved in so many pivotal moments. I think he scored a screamer down at Southampton. The Easter weekend. Do you think Niall Quinn and the rest of the Drummondville lot were just dreading Roy Keane knocking on the door? Because it seems to me as if he was, that season, he must have always been knocking on the door and saying, I found another player. We need him. He brought a lot of new faces into the squad that season. It was needed, and nearly all of them were perfect fits. But they must have been like, oh God, here comes Roy again. Quick, hide. He's gonna want us to get the checkbook out yet again for another player he's unearthed. I think Carlos Edwards must have cost like, I don't know, 1.5 million, couple of million.
I've got 1.5 in my mind.
Yeah, which, given the state of the club and the way we'd been relegated the year before, it was quite a financial undertaking to back Keane with all of these signings. But Edwards, very, very good player for us.
No, he played 15 games that season for us after signing, scored 5 goals. So if you're looking at a 1-in-3 winger, it's a pretty good addition to the goal scoring threat of a team, isn't it? He played 17 games or started 17 games rather in the Premier League for us. Didn't manage to get in the score sheet. So in total, he started 36, 37 games for us. Again, it's not as many as you probably think he did, but he certainly made a good impression with us. 2017, on December the 9th, Elliot Embleton made his debut away at Wolves. It was 0-0 draw. It was one of the highlights of that season. It was a bloody awful season. But the fact that we took 4 points off the team that won the championship just kind of sums Sunderland up. Lee Cattermole got sent off in this game. And in 2023, we beat West Brom at the Stadium of Light. This was a game that Mike Dodds was in charge for. Dan Ballard and Dan Neal got the goals in that 2-1 win. We'll take another short break there. We'll be back soon.
Oh, Hilton stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay, oh, Hilton stay.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. Enjoy comfortable rooms and friendly service when you stay with Hilton instead. Save up to 25% this season when you book with Hilton. Hilton for the stay. Terms apply.
While the Whos of Whoville were laughing and eating, the Grinch from his lair sought to wreak havoc on their season. He thought, how do I ruin their holiday meals? A plan sprang to mind, which he enacted with zeal. Dill pickle seasoning on fries will make for a green surprise. And I know they'll be shocked with these loathsome odd socks. So if you want to experience the Grinch's mischievous meal, head to McDonald's and show him how you really feel. The new Grinch meal, now at McDonald's. At participating McDonald's while supplies last. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Welcome back to Haway the Podcast, sponsored by LiveScore Bet, and we are going into December the 10th. Now, we're going to go all the way back to 1898, and this was our first ever defeat at Roker Park. We got beat 1-0 off Burnley. 23 years later, we got our first ever victory over a Welsh side. Cardiff City came to town and were beaten 4-1. Now, we talked, I think it was last week, we talked about a game at Southampton in 1952. It was a friendly match, and Sunderland had been invited down there because Southampton were opening their floodlights. A week later, we had a friendly at Roker Park to open our floodlights as well. So we played a game against Dundee in front of a crowd of almost 35,000. And we beat them 5-3. And Andrew, I don't know if you know much about this, given you're our resident kit expert, but the notes say that we were wearing a flame-coloured luminous shirt, which must be a bit of a collector's item, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there's a couple of photos of them kicking around, and I think they got used in a few other games at that period. But all of the photos I've seen are in blooming black and white. So I've heard various, like you say, flame coloured. I think there was a suggestion that in certain lights it might have been like a salmon pink or cerise. Is cerise a colour, or have I? Yeah. So I've seen photos of the shirt, and the material looks to be very different to what players were wearing then. They were all wearing that very heavy cotton, starchy type of shirt, whereas these look to be like soft and silky.
Yeah, right.
But unfortunately, as I say, I've never actually seen a colour version, so we're forgive the pun, we're a little bit in the dark as to exactly how it looks.
Now, well, if anybody was at the game and can shed some light on the
very good
colour of the strips that day, that would be exceptionally useful. It was interesting because this was a game where we actually had temporary floodlights, so this was almost like an experiment, and it was successful. So we got permanent floodlights installed at Roker Park. But the game itself, Len Shackleton put us 1-0 up. We then went 2-1 down at half-time to Dundee. A chap called Bert Henderson and another called Bobby Flavell scored goals. Trevor Ford got 2, Tommy Wright got 1, and Dickie Davis got another to give us a 5-2 lead. And then Bobby Flavell got 1 late on to make it 5-3. So an entertaining game, a big crowd, and the Sunderland public got to see something of a novelty at the time in terms of football being played under floodlights.
Top team in Scotland as well, the time Dundee. Yeah. Some big names there. Bobby Flavell, he was a big name. I'm just thinking we were always going to win with them shirts on, though, weren't we? Would have been scorching the grass with them shirts on, I tell you.
Indeed, we would have been. Right, we were going to go to 1955. Played a game against Sheffield United. We beat them 3-2. We went 3-0 up by half time. So Charlie Fleming got 2 goals and Billy Elliott got another. Sheffield United pulled it back in the second half to some extent. A former Sunderland player, or it might be a future Sunderland player, but somebody with Sunderland links who we've talked about in this podcast before, Colin Granger, got a goal back. And the chap called Alf Ringstead got another goal for Sheffield United to make it 3-2. And that moved us up to 3rd place in the First Division. And in 2004, the very best clapper that Sunderland have ever seen, Darren Williams, moved to Cardiff after 8 years at the club. Now, December the 11th, we're going to move on to now, 1926. This was a great game by all accounts at Roker Park. Manchester United came to town. We beat them 6-0 to put us to the top of the league. All of the goals came in the second half. Dave Halliday got 4. And it was actually Halliday's 25th birthday. So it's a very nice birthday present for him. Bobby Gurney got one of the others. And Billy Clunas, who we've talked about a few times on this podcast over the last few weeks, he got a penalty, of course. And that was a 6-0 victory. Now, 1968, we played a friendly against Slavia Prague at Roker Park, and Bobby Kerr scored both goals in the 2-0 win. 1978, Dave Merrington, who was caretaker manager after Jimmy Adamson had left. Jimmy Adamson gone to Leeds. And December 11th, 1978, Dave Merrington resigned to go to join Adamson at Elland Road. 1999, we got the FA Cup tie at the Stadium of Light that Andrew talked about earlier, Gavin McCann scoring against Portsmouth. 2004, we played Cardiff away under Mick McCarthy, beat them 2-0. That was a big win at the time. Dean Whitehead and Liam Lawrence scoring those goals. 2011, now this was Martin O'Neill's first game as manager at Sunderland. And I don't know if you remember, we played Blackburn and Seb Larson scored that very late free kick to give us the win and sent Martin O'Neill jumping like a jack in the box on the sidelines, didn't it? It was also James McLean's debut for us, and I think he came off the bench and made a real impact. He'd been signed in the summer by Steve Bruce, but he hadn't really got anywhere near the first team. Martin O'Neill chucked him in as a bit of a wild card, did really well, and regardless of what you think about James McLean, over the years, I thought he was actually a really, really good player for us, and it's one of those you wonder how things would have turned out if we'd stuck with him or he'd stuck with us, because he's a player that the teams who he plays for, the fans love, and the opposition fans hate, and players like that typically do well at Sunderland. So it would have been interesting to see how his career progressed, but it was not to be. But a year later on that day, we actually played Reading at the Stadium of Light. We beat them 3-0, and McLean was on the score sheet, along with Stephen Fletcher and Stefan Sessignon. We won 3-0 against Reading. And in 2021, we had a home game against Plymouth Argyle. We won 2-1. Dan Neal and Nathan Broadhead were on the score sheet. Now, we're going to go back to 1958 on December the 11th, because this is the day that Sunderland managed to get the signature of a former England international forward, Kelvin.
They did. And that lad was Ernie Taylor. Really, really interesting character, Ernie Taylor. So they did get his signature, and this was Ernie Taylor coming home. He was born in Silksworth, and in 1925, but started his career with Newcastle, and in the war years, started his career with Newcastle, by which time he was serving in the Royal Navy and was a submariner, so plenty of room for let's bring the sub off the bench if we had such a thing if we'd had such a thing in those days, which we didn't have. But what's one of the things that's really interesting I find about Ernie Taylor, my dad first put me on to Ernie Taylor. He was one of the players that my dad used to talk about. One of the reasons he used to talk about him was he was the same. My father was the same height as him. So Ernie Taylor was 5'4" and had size 4 feet. So he was quite a little fella, but he was a very, very good inside forward. And comparisons with Shaq, with Len Shackleton, in terms of his style, his ability, and his ability to beat a man, his use of the ball, and probably had a little bit more in him defensively. Team-wise, he definitely had something to offer. He signs for Newcastle anyway. He plays for Newcastle in the 1951 FA Cup final against Blackpool and Stanley Matthews, and he's a cup final winner with Newcastle. But after that final, Stanley Matthews was so impressed with him that he told his manager to go out and buy him.
Yeah, right.
And that Matthews thought he would be a great foil for him. And his manager did do that. And so he went, Taylor went to Blackpool and played alongside Stanley Matthews for a number of years, and got to the cup final he played in the what they call the Matthews Cup final.
Yeah.
If you've heard about that. And Stanley Matthews, although they call it the Matthews Cup final, Stanley Matthews always says it was Ernie Taylor. Ernie Taylor was the man who keyed him up and fed him, and just a really good player with the ball. That was him at Blackpool. And the other thing that's interesting about him, it centres around the Munich air disaster. So he's playing at Blackpool. The chat I've had about this was Sunderland were lining him up for a transfer, and the Munich air disaster occurred, and they stepped back from taking him because Man United made him their first signing after the Munich air disaster. Partly because of personnel that had been lost. He's an inside forward. He can also play on the wing. He's got a bit of versatility about him, but probably mostly because of he has a reputation of being a really solid character and a great team person. And Matt Busby is terribly appreciative about the work that Ernie Taylor does in that season. He's only there for not even for a full season, but he helps resurrect the club, and they actually get to, I don't know if you know about this, after the Munich air disaster, Man United actually got to the FA Cup final that year and got beat off Bolton, and Ernie Taylor plays a really big part in sort of helping that all happen. Just can't get it over the line in the final. But in doing that, it actually means he's involved in 3 different FA Cup finals over 7 years for 3 different teams, and really interesting sort of history with a cup he had, especially when you think about where we started. When we started the pod today, we were talking about the FA Cup and how important is it and what can you do, and his reputation was very, very high as being a lad that will help you win the FA Cup.
Yeah, right.
Or at least get to the FA Cup final. Anyway, he does go to Sunderland. He comes to Sunderland. Alan Brown brings him in partly off the back of the character as well as his football. Bearing in mind that if you look at the timing here, he's just lost Len Shackleton. Shaq's injuries meant that he'd retired. There's always a theory that Shaq didn't much fancy playing for Alan Brown, but that injury was a recorded and statistical injury given the number of games that he missed. So I'm not running with that it was about Brown that he retired. But anyway, Ernie Taylor comes in and spends a couple of seasons with Sunderland, and he's playing with the likes of in that front 5. He's got the likes of Ralphie Goodchild, Rhino Kitchenbrand, and Colin Granger, the singing winger, are all in that team. And those are hard years. Sunderland have just gone down. It takes a bit of character, I think, to, it doesn't go well. There's a lot of experienced players that Brown gets rid of, and the team are kind of struggling a bit. And you've got Charlie Hurley and Stan Anderson in there, 2 characters. But I mean, Hurley was just a young lad, and struggling himself a bit with the expectations on him. And Taylor comes in and does a job. He can play on the left or the right. He can play winger. He can play inside forward. And he stays till 1961 and moves off in 1961. What I found interesting about him was when Dad always said that he was a very well-known and popular player. When you look at his debut for Sunderland, he put 7,000 on the gate.
Right.
And between the last home game and this home game. And I mean, the fans weren't happy about where we were at this point. We weren't doing well in the second division. It wasn't going well. And some of the fans were voting with their feet, but they signed Ernie Taylor and an extra 7,000 turned up to watch this lad play. That was his stock. His stock was pretty high. He'd won England cap, and having mentioned England once already today, I'll mention them again. That one cap he played with Stanley Matthews. He played it at Wembley. And yes, it was that game against the Magyars where Hungary came and absolutely whooped England 6-3. And unfortunately, he never played another game for England. And the likes of Stanley Matthews thought that was pretty harsh, that he never got the chance to. He seemed to almost be one of the players that carried the can for that loss. Nothing to do with Hungary just being absolutely brilliant on the day. It's all to do with England not getting it right. But that was I just thought this lad's such an interesting history that he'd had, and his connection with Man United, his connection with Stanley Matthews, and then to come to Sunderland at probably the worst couple of seasons. There was 2 seasons, first time ever down in the second division, and but by the time he left, we were just starting to head. Hurley'd found his feet. Stan Anderson was getting there. We had Ralphie Goodchild scoring goals, but I don't exactly know what happened to him. But the team was just, Ian Lawther came into it, and the team was just starting to find its feet in the second division. Colin Nelson, he played a lot of games with Colin Nelson, who we were talking about last week. That was the group of players that he played a lot of games with. He'd be 35. He was 33 when he came, and 35 when he stopped playing. But a really, really interesting character, I thought, from an era that was quite a difficult couple of seasons with Sunderland.
No, it's excellent. And again, that's somebody who I've heard the name of, but I've never really known much about. So that's excellent. And in that story, Andrew, Kelvin mentioned Ralphie Goodchild has been part of the scene at that time. I think you've been doing some digging around him, haven't you?
I have, yes. I mean, Kelvin, you and me were like Gates and Gabbiadini. We've just got this partnership. We've never had to work on it. There's never been any training or discussions. It's just
pal,
natural.
Listen, Eric, get on with the story, Eric.
So you're Gabbiadini, are you? And I'm Eric Gates.
I'm not being Lemon Gatesy.
Right.
Okay. We'll have to watch it if a fly comes past Andrew and he falls off his seat.
Yeah. I didn't know you were going to talk about Ernie Taylor, but like Martin, he's a name I knew of. I knew he was a Sunderland-born England international, so a lot of really good pedigree behind him. Interestingly enough, you were talking about there the Matthews Cup final, and how Taylor had quite a big role in that. Well, of course, the other player who gets forgotten about that final is Stan Mortensen, who scored the hat-trick. And he's from these parts as well. I think he's South Shields. So, he's what was County Durham at the time. Right, so that just proves
I didn't realise that he was I didn't realise that, Andrew. Right?
It just proves, though, doesn't it, that the Northeast was a hotbed for talent. But I love that, and yeah, it does tie in nicely with this info I've dug up about Johnny what a spoonerism that is. Johnny Goodchild. You were talking about him a couple of weeks ago, Kelvin, and you said, whatever happened to him? And I was exactly the same as you. I was thinking, that's a really good point, because in his last game for Sunderland, he scored a hat-trick, and then he's never seen again, and you just, you wonder what's gone on there. So, again, when I was finished reading up about John Kay in court and all of that, I had a little look at this to try and get a bit of the background. Goodchild's final game, as we say, he scored a hat-trick in February 1961 away at Leeds United. We beat them 4-1. And, you're thinking there, like, Johnny be good. But he only ever is a reserve or a stand-in. He never establishes himself as a first-team player. And even after getting that hat-trick, all the talk in the press the following week is, will Willie McFeet be back from injury and to come and take his place? You must be gutted. You've scored a hat-trick. You think, I might get a run in the team. And yet all people want to talk about is whether the lad you were covering for is going to be available. McFeet was clearly seen as the longer-term bet. One of the reasons for that is I think Goodchild couldn't define a particular role. He was one of those players in the days before substitutes where he was too versatile for his own good. He was half decent in a few positions. It's also at the time, which Kelvin very astutely put, the early 60s were just starting to see Brown's thinking take effect amongst the team. In 1959-60, 1960-61, he's clearly assessing what players he has on the books, but also is trying to balance the finances at the club. This was still in the aftermath of that financial scandal. So in that period, there's a lot of youth teamers or fringe players being given their debuts. By the end of 1960-61, though, Brown now has an idea of what he wants to do with the squad and who he wants to maintain and who he wants to keep on board. He brings in George Hurd for relatively big money. He knows that in the summer he's going to be pushing really hard to buy Brian Clough. So that is presumably why Goodchild isn't on the retained list, which is announced at the start of May 1961. He's always done a decent job for us, but never good enough to get in the team, from what I can gather. There's 6 youth teamers on the list. They're all given frees. The number of pros at the club is slashed from 40 to 32. It just really, it comes across as Goodchild was collateral damage in the wider situation that the club found themselves in. Goodchild was one of the few players the club wanted a small fee for. So, he wasn't like, the club weren't writing him off. They thought he was decent. They just didn't think there was a spot for him. The other 2 players at that point who were being released, but Sunderland were going to insist on a bit of a transfer payment for, were Reg Pierce and your man, Ernie Taylor. I get the impression Ernie Taylor by this point is maybe one of the higher earners, but he's starting to get a little bit older. So not that he wasn't a good player, it was just a case of time to move him on. Within a couple of days, Goodchild is being linked with a move to Hartlepool. That's Hartlepool United. They weren't Hartlepool until later in the decade. At that point, they were up for re-election. And I thought, hang on, that doesn't sound very good about Goodchild. I got the impression he'd be attracting interest from clubs higher up the ladder. Sure enough, he ends up going to another second division club. He goes to Brighton and Hove Albion, who were in that same division as us. And I think, putting two and two together, one of the reasons behind that is the following month, they go and appoint George Curtis as their new manager. Now, George Curtis has presumably already had an input on transfer dealings because he had been a coach at Roker Park, so presumably knew a bit about Goodchild and was suitably impressed enough to get him on board. Nothing here is suggesting to me that Goodchild was a washout. It was just it wasn't working for him at Sunderland. There isn't a definitive answer. I can get the general background there, but at no point does Brown talk specifically about him and say why he's released. There's no real comments in the newspapers from the journalists that are watching him regularly. None of them are writing him off or anything like that. But he obviously was a decent player, and although Brighton in the next few seasons entered a period of real struggle, he was one of the few lads who was a consistent performer. So clearly a good player. Sunderland just wasn't meant to be for him. So that was what my digging unearthed, and a little bit more context as to why a player can go from scoring a hat trick from us to being put on the retained list, on the release list.
Yeah, it's always seemed. Sorry, Kelvin. It's always seemed a big sort of drop off, hasn't it? It's a really strange quirk, really, isn't it? But no, let's get a bit more insight on that.
Because I don't know if you can remember. I'd spoken with a relative of his, a relative by marriage, and they said, "Oh, would love to know what the fallout was," implying that there had been some kind of fallout. And when I came back and asked again about that, their memory of that was something about asking. He was getting married and asked the club about a clubhouse, so and whether there'd been some kind of fallout there, but they weren't sure about that. That was just chat from them. But I mean, 45 appearances, 21 goals is not too bad for a supposed inside forward stroke winger. It does, as Martin says, it does seem like it's quite a drop off, isn't it? And like 28 games in which season was that? The 58-59 season. He played a lot of games in 1958-59. A lot of games with Ernie Taylor in 58-59. But huge. There's more players. He's not alone like that. There'll be other players that we could easily dig out and just say, God, his stats are pretty good, but he just disappears, I
mean,
and there was a lot of reshuffling going on with Brown, wasn't there? He was wheeling and dealing. Yeah.
That's what I picked up from it. But to be perfectly honest, Kelvin, the newspapers wouldn't at that period wouldn't really touch on a fallout over a clubhouse.
No.
I mean, even when Alan Brown left in '64, and a lot of people seemed to think it was because the club hadn't provided him with accommodation. There was some sort of issue there. It wasn't something that the papers really felt they needed to get into. But that could be a very good reason why he was willing to uproot his family and go to the complete opposite end of the country in Brighton and Hove Albion. I assumed it was because his former coach was there and there was a bit of a relationship. But if you've got no security in the Northeast and you've not got a place to call home, if somebody then comes up with a decent contract, and who knows, maybe they were a bit more forthcoming with a clubhouse, maybe you think, right, well, I am going to take the plunge and travel however many hundreds of miles away.
Yeah.
Now you've said it, I do remember you saying you'd spoken to some relatives, and that's very interesting and very possibly the real reason behind it.
Yeah. Held in quite high esteem by Brighton. I think he lands back at Hartlepool's as well, doesn't he? I think after Brighton he goes. Does he go back to Hartlepool's?
He might have then ended up. Might have then ended up at the North East. Like I say, Brighton were had a really bad period with him in the team, but that was just pure coincidence. It wasn't his arrival. From what I gather, he was one of the few players that were giving them any hope of doing anything positive.
It wasn't Hartlepool's, it was York and then Darlington.
Yeah,
right.
He played for, I think. My memory's starting to kick in there. Yeah. Good stuff.
Excellent.
Good stuff.
Right, we'll take another short break. We'll be back soon.
Popeye's Scary Good new Freddy Fazbear Box has garlic palm tenders and cheesy bites with marinara sauce. Try it before it's too late. And see Five Nights at Freddy's 2, only in theaters. Love that chicken from Popeyes. Limited time at participating U.S. restaurants.
As a contractor, I don't pay for materials I don't use. So why would I pay for stuff I don't need in my mobile plan? That's why my Biz plan from Verizon Business is so perfect. Now I can choose exactly what I want, and I only pay for what I need.
Right now, with my Biz plan, get our best price, as low as $25 a line. Visit Verizon.com/business to get started today. New lines only. Price per month with 5+ lines. Includes autopay and paper-free billing and promotional discount. Taxes, fees, economic adjustment charge. Applicable add-ons, prices, and terms apply. Guarantee applies to base monthly rate and stated discounts only. Add-on prices additional. Offers in January 5th, 2026.
Welcome back to Haway the Podcast, sponsored by Live Score Bet, and we are going back to 1891, December the 12th. Now, Sunderland had a home fixture against Darwin, and we beat Darwin 7-0. Jimmy Miller scored a hat-trick, Hughie Wilson, Davy Hanna, and 2 goals from Johnny Campbell gave us that win. It was notable as well because when we played them away later in the season, we beat them 7-1. And that's our record aggregate outcome against one team in a single season. So we won 14-1 against Darwin over the 2 games. 1914, we had a game against Burnley at Roker Park, and we beat them 2-1. But this is estimated to be the lowest crowd ever for a first-team game at Roker Park. There was only, and this was a time when gates weren't recorded to the extent they potentially are now, but they reckon only 2,000 people were there. And the weather was terrible, which is one thing, but obviously it was the start of World War I. So when we've talked about these periods of football, during the war periods and in between the war periods and all that sort of stuff before, but it obviously impacts how people perceive football and people's desire to go and see football and all that sort of stuff. On the field, Sunderland's goals came from Charlie Buchan and Bobby Best. For Burnley, Bob Kelly, who we spoke about last week, because he joined Sunderland, he got the Burnley goal. So Bob Kelly, one of Burnley's, I think he's voted as Burnley's greatest ever player, had a briefer spell at Sunderland later in his career, but yes, he got the Burnley goal on that occasion.
Charlie Buchan was very outspoken about football continuing during the First World War. There was a lot of flack being taken on by the game, by the general public. They were not happy that football was continuing, and a lot of players felt the same. And Charlie Buchan was one of the leading voices in saying, "Listen, this isn't right. It was a real bone of contention that football continued." And I think in the Second World War, the sport had learnt its lesson, because very quickly after war being announced, the Football League suspended all games.
Now, it was obviously an unprecedented situation for them to deal with and navigate at that point, wasn't it? But in hindsight, they probably should have stopped playing a bit earlier than they did. 1948, Colin Todd was born in Chesley Street. 1987, on December the 12th, Sunderland played a game away at Northampton at the County Ground. Paul Lemon and Marco Gabbiadini, I think that's his first mention for this episode. So that's an hour and a half in, so that's pretty good. We're on the score sheet. Now, in 1993, this was a game against Grimsby. We played them away from home. It was on Tyne-Tees TV, live on Tyne-Tees, as we like to say. And I don't know if either of you two were at this game. I was. And I was playing Sunday football at the time, and the night before, I got a phone call from one of my mates going, "Do you fancy going to Grimsby tomorrow? My dad and his mate are going to drive down. Got a spare ticket." I was like, "Yeah, go on, we'll go on." So I had to make the phone call to my football manager in a croaky voice going, "Sorry, Tommy, I'm not going to be able to play tomorrow. Got a bit of a bad throat, got a cold, got the flu, feel like shit." Get up early next morning, drive down to Grimsby, and it's absolutely bucketing down. We get down to Grimsby, me and Macca and his dad, Dave, and his dad's mate, Derek. And we meet my mate's brother, Ant, who's at university in Hull at the time. We had a few drinks, maybe alcoholic, maybe not. If my dad's listening, and mum and dad are listening, we're definitely not alcoholic drinks. And we're just sat in the pub and it's just watching the rain come down. It's absolutely, never seen rain like it. Absolutely bucking. We're going, this game's going to be called off, surely. And we keep checking the radio in the car on the way down. And obviously, no mobile phones at the time, no internet. You're asking at the bar if the game's still on. Oh, yeah, it's still on, according to teletext or whoever the local radio and all that sort of stuff. We get into the ground and it's so wet. The players are warming up and the ball won't roll. And you're going, this game's never gonna start. Fortunately, we were in an end undercover, so we weren't getting wet. But you could see on the pitch the game it's going to be a bloody stretch to get the game started. But of course, because it's live on TV, there's this imperative incentive to keep going and try to play. The teams come out, and it's an absolute farce. I don't know if anybody's seen the TV footage, but the ball will not roll more than 2 or 3 yards. It's getting stuck. And they play for 6 or 7 minutes. And it's just it's just ridiculous. I think the referee's a chap called Stephen Lodge, who we had encounters with over the years. He abandons it after 6 or 7 minutes. But of course, all the Sunderland fans, we've all paid to go in. I can't remember, I said earlier, I've got a spare ticket. I can't remember if we actually had tickets or whether we paid on the turnstile. And I've got a feeling we paid in the turnstile because as a group of supporters under the roof of Grimsby, we all stayed there. There was no announcement for a long time that the game was abandoned. There was no announcement that, what was going to happen in terms of the money that you've paid to watch 6 or 7 minutes of football. So we stood there, and it must have been, in my mind, there was at least 1,000 Sunderland supporters there, and it was the best sing-song I've ever been part of. We stood there we must have stood there for about an hour singing, the old boys were getting the old songs out about the greatest centre-half the world's ever seen. There was all sorts of songs going on. It was interspersed by "We want money back, say we want money back." And eventually Grimsby sort of hurriedly came to this conclusion that they would give vouchers out to exchange for the replayed game. So we then had to queue up. Again, from my mind, there was one fella handing out vouchers to all of the Sunderland supporters who turned up. So, we'd gone down there for a 3 o'clock kickoff or whatever. I think it was a 3 o'clock kickoff. Saw 6 or 7 minutes of football. We'd stayed for probably an hour and a half by this time, 2 hours by the time we got back out. The weather had not relented. So it was still pissing down. The roads were covered in water. You're driving through puddles. And we get in the car and start driving back. And as you can imagine with the weather, it was a bit of a slow journey. We get further and further up north and it starts to snow. And for whatever reason, we used to always come off the A1 to get back to concert, go on the A68. And Derek, who's driving, I think Dave was driving. But anyway, Dave's driving the A68 and the snow was getting heavier and heavier. Obviously, the gritters haven't been out. Snow on the roads. And it's getting pretty treacherous. I just remember Derek turning around to me and Macca in the back and going, does the phrase, "oh shit," spring to mind? Because we're swerving about in the bloody snow. Anyway, we eventually get back home. And I turn up to football training on the Wednesday. And our manager, Tommy, goes, "enjoy the game?" I was like, what? He goes, "seen you on the TV." So after the game called off, obviously the cameras are all panned to the away end, people singing and chanting, and there was me on the TV blowing my cover. I had a very quick recovery, so I thought I'd go to Grimsby, but that was.
How was the bench that weekend then?
It wasn't very warm, I can tell you. So yes, that was a memorable trip to Grimsby. And of course, the other memorable trip, as we've talked about before, is the game that we turned up in pink salmon shirts, which were nothing like the flashy ones we had in 1952. 2009, we played another game against Portsmouth. We talked about the FA Cup game 10 years earlier. This was a 1-1 draw in the Premier League. Darren Bent scored our goal. We were 1-0 up. And Yunus Kabul equalised in the last minute for Portsmouth to make it 1-1. Now, Kabul was obviously a bit of a controversial figure at Sunderland at the time because he turned down that move to Sunderland under Roy Keane, saying he wouldn't join the club if there was an earthquake. He scored in the 90th minute. He actually got a second yellow card for taking his shirt off in the celebration. He got sent off. So he left the field. I think Steve Bruce was our manager. Avram Grant was the Portsmouth manager. Of course, Kabul made amends later on and joined the club and was a very popular player at Sunderland for the season he was here. But yeah, at that point, he wasn't Mr. Popular at the Stadium of Light. 2020, we played Lincoln away. I think was this Lee Johnson's first away game? But we won 4-1 or 4-0. Grant Ledbetter scored a penalty. Charlie Wyke got a couple, and Jack Diamond scored a lovely goal, curling it in as we beat Lincoln convincingly on that day. And in 2023, just a couple of years ago, this was a game that we played Leeds United at the Stadium of Light, a nighttime game. Mike Dodds was in charge. I think he made a couple of changes. He brought Jensen Silt into the team. We went to a back five, and Job got a goal in the second half to give us a 1-0 win. We'll move on to December the 13th now, when we talked about Ernie Taylor earlier. In 1958, on December the 13th, Ernie Taylor made his debut in a 2-0 defeat to Cardiff at Roker Park. Billy Elliott missed a penalty for us on that day. 1975, we played Oxford at Roker Park. We beat them 1-0. Ian Porterfield scored a last-minute winner for us, but Gary Rowell came off the bench to make his debut that day. He came on from Mel Holden. Interestingly, again, it's interesting to me anyway. It's probably not interesting to many other people, but the Oxford manager that day has a Sunderland connection. Does anybody, either of you two know who that was and what the connection is?
Ooh, I was at this game. I should know.
It's a genuine connection, but it's a bit of a tenuous one.
Any clues?
He was part of our coaching staff many years later.
Oh.
Oh, what is his name? I can see him.
Now,
what's he look like? Oh, well, Kelvin, between us, we can the G-Force can team up again. If you set it up for me, I'll see if I can tuck it away.
Did he have sort of dark hair and glasses? He played, man. What was his name? I cannot. No.
I'm not sure.
It's not coming.
I must admit, I couldn't pick him out with a lineup. He was a coach under Roy Keane, a chap called Mick Brown.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
No. That's great knowledge, that, because I could have been here all night and I wouldn't have got that one.
Yeah.
He was like the experienced head in Roy Keane's coaching setup. But yes, he was the manager of Oxford that day. I think that was a couple of years in charge of Oxford. Then he was assistant manager and coaches at various clubs. He's scouted for a lot of teams subsequently as well.
That Oxford game, that Porterfield goal. When I was talking last week about his accident and then coming back and getting hurt in the Southampton game, and he played 2 games after it, and that was one of those games.
Yeah, okay.
And he did score a goal, but as I said, he wasn't right, and Gary Rowell came on for his debut.
There we go.
Yeah.
1978. Now, we mentioned Billy Elliott earlier missing a penalty in Ernie Taylor's debut in 1978. Billy Elliott was appointed as Sunderland, I think he was caretaker manager, wasn't he, for all intents and purposes? But obviously Dave Merrington, I think it was Dave Merrington leaving, as we talked about earlier, joining Jimmy Addison. Billy Elliott stepped in. 1980, this was a game against Arsenal, 2-0 win at home, and it's famous for John Hawley thundercracker, I'll say it politely.
Yes, it was a great goal.
35, 40, 50 yards out, however many yards out you want it to be. Past Pat Jennings as well, so it's not a bad goalkeeper to score against, is it?
It was what a goal it was. But there's a good, there is some writer not as good as Andrew Smithson wrote about this game in has gotten on this day in June, in December 2023. If anybody wanted a bigger deep dive into that goal in that game, because there was always jokes about he always looked knackered, John Hawley. But he actually said that the reason why he smashed it from where he did was because he was knackered. So he was kind of feeding the myth a little bit that he was done. I will throw in, that was a great goal, but John Cook nearly scored the goal of the century that day.
Oh, really?
He went on a fantastic run down the touchline. I mean, he just burned the grass and cut in off his wing, and it was if he'd scored, and he beat the keeper. I cannot remember who the player was that. It was one of the fullbacks. It might have been Paddy Rice. Just got his toe to it and towed it away. It would have been a fantastic goal. That started in our half. I'm not kidding you. I'm not embellishing that. He picked the ball up just inside our half and ran half the length of the pitch and then cut in. It was it could have taken the shine off Hawley's goal. That
Kelvin, there, I can't let that pass. You were very kind about a writer named A. Smithson. I genuinely think you are an amazing writer and better than me. I will have read that article at the time and enjoyed it. But now that you've reminded me of it, I'll dig it back out because I love reading your first-hand accounts of games in that era. It's just it gives us something different to just the newspaper report. There'll always be something, Kelvin, that you'll remember, like that move that you're talking about where John Cook nearly scored a screamer for himself. So I'll be digging that out. You're very kind, but don't hide your light under a bushel. Anybody listening to this gets a chance to read Kelvin's stuff from that era, you've got to take it, man. Brilliant.
And what I will say, because I haven't said it so far this episode, is that team were only 2 players away, from being a pretty good team,
Well, leads us nicely on to the next bit, because this team were definitely more than 2 players away from being a good side. In 1986, Sunderland lost 1-0 away at Barnsley. A chap called Stuart Gray, who went on to play for Aston Villa, scored the goal. Notable because Bobby Mims made his debut for us in goal. We had a terrible kind of run of goalkeeping catastrophes, I think, in that couple of years under Laurie McMenemy. He was always striving to sort out his goalkeeping. That, you know what, I think, not making excuses for anything at all, but if you don't get your goalkeeper right, you haven't got a chance of anything else going right. And he never got his goalkeeper right. And that was, I think we had Seamus McDonagh, Bobby Mims, Andy Dibble, Ian Hestford. There was probably some others I haven't. Cameron Duncan, I think, made it. Bob Boulder around. Never got his goalkeeper right. 1997, we played a game at the Stadium Light against West Brom. We won 2-0. Kevin Phillips and Alan Johnson got the goals. Now, in 2003, we played a game away at West Ham. We were 2-0 up with Jason McAteer and John Oster scoring goals. This was in the second tier of football. Both Sunderland and West Ham had been relegated. But we ended up losing 3-2. Jermaine Defoe got 2 and Ian Pearce got another in the second half to seal a 3-2 victory for West Ham. There were 5 players on the West Ham team sheet that day with Sunderland connections. Obviously, Jermaine Defoe was one of them. Do I have a guess of some of the others?
Ooh, where was Don Hutchison at the time?
That's one of them. He was on the bench at Upton Park at the time.
Well done. My only memory of this game was I was away with my now wife. We'd gone down to the town where she'd grown up. There was a big family occasion. It was somebody's significant birthday. Remember getting ready for this big do, watching Sky Sports, watching the scores coming in. And I had such a pet lip on me that night. I met a lot of the in-laws for the first ever time, and they must have just gone away thinking, what is she getting herself into with him? He is just nothing but a prick, basically. I was just fuming. 2-0 up, we'd blown it, and I couldn't be bothered to do any small talk or anything. I was just muttering to myself, complaining, going, when's the buffet coming out? I want me buffet and I want to go back to the hotel. I'm sick of me life. I'm sick as a chip. So I don't remember who was playing for West Ham because I was too busy making a show of myself and letting down my now dear wife, bless her. I don't know why she persevered with us.
Yeah, that's
you don't know why either,
Andrew, is it not? It's a pod in itself. That's a different kind of pod, Andrew. But Martin and I will point you in the direction of some assistance there if you want. Back to the question. Anton Ferdinand wasn't one of them, was he?
No, he wasn't.
Right.
No, he wasn't. He probably
trying to think where
he must have
where
been
he started off.
No, he was at West Ham. He must have been at West Ham at the time.
Right.
Were they all players, or are we talking coaches or anything like that?
One. So I'll give you this. Robbie Stockdale was on the bench for West Ham that day.
Aye.
Who
I don't
obviously
remember
went.
him being there, like.
I didn't know
No,
that.
I don't remember him being at West Ham as well, but he was. David Connolly was in the West Ham team. We've said Jermaine Defoe, Robbie Stockdale, Don Hutchison, and the other one went on to play for Sunderland, I think, later that season.
Wow.
What position?
Striker. Or it
West
might be
Ham?
Brian
Dean?
Brian Dean, well done. Yeah, Brian Dean.
Yes.
Right.
I needed the clues. I would have been. Do you know what? Because I didn't get the other answers, I think I'm going to go in another mood again about that game. Now, not talking to you two for the rest of the night.
Well, sorry, I'll get the buffet on later on. You'll be right.
The fugue.
2008, we played West Brom. We beat them 4-0. This was the game Ricky Spracia first took charge of. Roy Keane had left. Ricky Spracia got put in charge, and it kind of seemed as if the mood had lightened, the shackles were off. Sunderland played brilliantly in this game. Kenman Jones got a couple of goals. Andy Reid got one. And Jibril Cisse scored a penalty. And I think next weekend we went to Hull and beat them 4-1. And Steve Malbranck scored a great goal. And it kind of seemed as if, this is going to be fantastic. This Spracia's just unlocked something that Keane was maybe keeping the down low on. But yeah, we didn't turn out like that. But it was a good few weeks anyway. And that West Brom game was a very impressive performance. Now, we talked about Stuart Downing earlier scoring against Coventry on the 13th of December 2014. He was on the score sheet against us as Sam Allardyce brought his West Ham team to the Stadium of Light. Jody Gomez had scored a penalty to put us in front, but Downing equalised for West Ham. We'll take another short break there. We'll be back soon.
The Hyundai Getaway Sales Event is on now with awesome deals on their most popular models, including adventure-ready SUVs like the Hyundai Santa Fe and Santa Fe Hybrid. There's also the stylish Elantra, packed with the latest tech, or go electric with the Ioniq 5 or Ioniq 6. Visit HyundaiUSA.com or call 562-314-4603 for more details. Offers end January 5th, 2026.
John Legend, Sheryl Crow, Elvis Costello, and Alanis Morissette star in the MGM Plus original series, Words and Music. Iconic artists share intimate performances and the stories behind the songs. New episodes Sundays on MGM Plus.
Welcome back to Haway the Podcast for the final bit of this week of Sunderland history. And we are on December the 14th. Now, 1895, Sunderland played a game against Small Heath, which, of course, became Birmingham City. We beat them 2-1. Johnny Campbell and Jimmy Hanna got the goals. 1912, we beat Everton 4-0. away at Goodman Park. Jimmy Richardson scored 2, Charlie Buchan and Jackie Mordew got the goals. Now, in 1935, Sunderland played a game at Leeds Road. We talked about Leeds Road earlier with Monty's performance there in 1962. 1935, we played a game there and we conceded a goal after just 10 seconds. A chap called Ken Willingham, who went on to play for Sunderland, got that goal, and that was the only goal of the game. 1963, Huddersfield are featuring quite heavily in this episode. 1963, we played Huddersfield at Roker Park, and we were 2-0 down in 17 minutes, but we came back and won 3-2 with goals from Nick Sharkey, George Hurd, and a penalty from Johnny Crossan. 1970, this was a big day, I think, in Sunderland history when you look back on it, because Dave Watson, a centre-forward from Rotherham, was signed for $100,000, which is probably big money at the time, or it would have been big money at the time, but very worthwhile money as it turned out. He was obviously converted to a centre-half and, obviously had an exceptionally good career at Sunderland and elsewhere. And Kelvin, we've talked about Dave Watson at length previously on past pods, haven't we? But you can't mention Dave Watson without reminiscing a little bit, can you?
A little bit about the man, yeah. He was just one of my favourite players, and I was going to say there's a deep dive, isn't there, on one of our pods, which I think was June 25. I think we did a real deep dive on him, didn't we? You guys allowed me to wax lyric about him, but there's a lot to wax lyric about with Davy Watson. But yeah, that was him coming in. He was our first £100,000 player, and I always think it's interesting, the manager of Rotherham that sold him to us. Do you know who that was? Tommy Doherty.
Yeah, okay.
Sold him. He was the manager of Rotherham, and Dave Watson often has fondly recalled Doherty over the years as being one of the most innovative sort of coaches that he ever worked with in all his time, and said that he got him really, really fit when he went to play for him there. So it's an interesting aside, really, about his career. But yes, the start of a really, really fantastic spell with us, and what a fine player he really was. That lad could have played any sport. And
Kelvin, it's interesting when you look back on it, isn't it? Because Dave Watson obviously made his reputation as a central defender. He played for England there and all that sort of stuff, had a long career with us and other people playing centre-half. We paid that big money for him as a centre-forward. So he can't have been too shabby as a centre-forward for us to put that cash down for him at the time.
So he definitely played centre-half before, though. Doherty used to play him. Doherty used to play him up front, but would throw him back if he had a need, and he definitely played there at Notts County as well. And he was so quick across the ground. He had this prodigious leap. I don't think he was greatly two-footed. If he shot, it was his right foot that was shooting. But he could play a bit, So he wasn't a bad centre forward. He wasn't a bad centre forward. But even when Brown signed him, there are people who were at the club at the time. Billy Elliott gets a lot of credit for moving Watson back to centre-half almost on a permanent basis and keeping him there. And then Stokoe comes in and has the good sense to run with that. You were saying before, Martin, about you've got to get your goalkeeper sorted out. Once you've sorted your goalie out, you need to get the spine of your team sorted out. Get your defence sorted, get your centre of defence sorted, get the centre of midfield sorted, and quite often you can build a team around that. And even when he came to the club and when Brown was playing him centre forward, Brown was telling people that he would play, that he thought he would be a centre half.
Yeah, right.
And that he would probably play for England. There are people that are on record as saying that Brown had told them that. I'm trying to think who one of the sources would be. Chico Hamilton, who was a young player at the club. I asked him who his influences were when he was at the club. Who were the people that he followed and were the role models? And Jimmy Monty and Davy Watson were the consummate professionals at the club. And he just slipped in to the conversation. Alan Brown always said he would play centre half for England. So. Yeah, I think there was in the footballing kind of brains trust, whether it was Brown, whether it was Billy Elliott, whether it was Bob Stoke, or a feeling that this lad'll play for England at centre half, and that he'll be a centre half. But he was such an athlete, Martin. He could have played anything. He could have been a back row forward at the rugby. He's just one of these really infuriating characters that would have been good, that could turn his hand to anything, So him and I have got something in common in that regard, We might not have I might not have his inches, but I've got his talent for being absolutely cracking at anything I turn my hand to. I just choose not to turn my hand to very much, Oh God, just I mean, I said it in the deep dive, but he's one of them players I'm just so privileged to have seen him play for us. What I like about him as well, I share a little bit of chat from time to time with Man City fans of a similar age, and they're just like me, just in awe of the job that he did for them, and the way that he went about his business, So he just seemed to have that effect on us all, really. Fine player, and the start of a great career with us. Never let us down once, Davy Watson.
Very good. And Dave Watson was in the team on the same day in 1974, so 4 years after he arrived. He was in the team as Sunderland beat Millwall 2-0 with goals from Bobby Kerr and Pop Robson. And for the final little thing that we're going to go into today, we're going to go to 1991. Now, we talked last week, I think, about Don Goodman's debut for Sunderland away at Molineux, where we were down to 9 men within the space of 5 or 6 minutes, and we lost out to a last minute or late goal anyway. A week later, we arrived at Roker Park for Don Goodman's home debut, played Leicester City, but there was stuff going on off the field as well as on the field, Andrew, and it was a bit of a tumultuous time, really, for the club. There was a lot of, I guess, unease, unhappiness with how things were going, a lot of uncertainty, and this game this day, I guess, kind of summed a lot of it up, didn't it?
It did. Tumultuous is the perfect word to use for everything that was happening at the club back in 1991, both on the pitch and off it. There was all sorts going on. Now, I've already shamelessly plugged my written article for, must be the 9th of December, Tuesday the 9th of December, but also on rokerreport.sbnation.com.
Well done.
Thank you very much. Also on that website for Sunday, the 7th of December, I talk about this era. It's a part of Sunderland history that fascinates me because I was getting into football, but I was still quite a naive young kid. So a lot of the more negative stuff kind of passed me by. So I like going back to that era and reading about it. So yeah, 7th of December, I'm talking about the owner, Bob Murray, and various issues that are happening at the club that he's having to deal with. The 14th of December is a rare example of success for the team. The football club is meant to play football. We sometimes forget that. And it's just nice when everything else is happening to go watch an actual game and see Sunderland get the win. This period, as I say, and as you say, Martin, we've spoken about it before. We were under Dennis Smith. We'd just been relegated. He's trying to shake things up. Viv Busby is gone earlier in the month. That was controversial. Marco Gabbiadini had been sold. Again, that was controversial. The big hope, though, was Don Goodman. On his debut, he'd just come into an absolute circus. 2 players sent off within 10 minutes, and he must be thinking, what have I let myself in for? The following weekend, though, it's time for his home debut, his Roker Park debut, and things are a lot better for him, thankfully. The team that day, we start with Tony Norman in goal, who we've spoken about earlier. My understanding of Montgomery was that Tony Norman was very similar in that they didn't rely on their reflexes, but they were just so athletic. They could produce saves, both Montgomery and Norman, that a lot of goalkeepers couldn't. Some goalkeepers maybe might have had some of the basics more honed, but both of those just had this raw ability and spring about them. So yeah, Tony Norman was playing in goal. He was due to miss out. Tim Carter had been recalled from a loan at Birmingham City because Norman was struggling with a groin strain, but he ended up having a late fitness test and he ends up playing. The back 4, John Kay, Gary Bennett, Kevin Ball and Anton Rogan. At least 2 of those are names we've mentioned earlier today, lads. In midfield is Gary Hours, Paul Bracewell, Gordon Armstrong, somebody else we've mentioned, and Peter Davenport. Then up front, you've got Don Goodman, of course, and John Bird. The 2 subs, the 2 lads named on the bench, were Colin Pascoe and David Rush, which is pretty attacking. If you've only got 2 substitutes available to you and you've picked 2 strikers, I think that suggests that Smith knows he's under pressure and he needs to try and get wins.
And your goalie's carrying an injury, and you haven't got a sub goalkeeper.
Yeah,
it's quite remarkable if you look back on it. Today you probably wouldn't even start him despite having the sub goalkeeper available.
Yeah.
You know what? At the time, it was always said Gordon Armstrong would go in goal if we needed somebody to go in goal, and I don't recall him ever having to, and it always disappointed me. We never got the chance to see Gordon Armstrong play in goal.
Well, maybe on this day we got closer to it than we ever realised. I could see Gordon Armstrong being a decent goalkeeper because he's another one. He's athletic. He's quite tall and strong. Yeah,
he's got the physique for it, hasn't he?
I wouldn't have. Well, I say I wouldn't have minded it if Sunderland had their goalkeeper sent off or injured. I would have been panicking like mad. It doesn't matter who went in. But yeah, we've spoken a lot about Dennis Smith and how around this time the writing's on the wall. He's starting to get desperate. He's maybe making decisions that he wouldn't have done in the past. Those substitutes certainly indicate that he knows he's on borrowed time. The crowd, 15,094, and included in the crowd is Jack Charlton, who is there watching John Byrne. Now, John Byrne didn't have his brightest game for us, and whilst it was low on goals, the match was quite enjoyable. So Jack Charlton's hopefully enjoyed his afternoon back in the northeast. I've dug out the Sports Echo again to go through the main points of the game. Very early on, Gary Hours gets booked for fouling Dave Kitson. Dave Kitson, of course, I think he played for Newcastle famously, but he was actually a lad from... of course. Dave Kitson's at Redhead. Yeah. Oh, flipping heck. Yes, right. Paul
Kitson. His brother.
Yeah. They didn't know each other, but they were brothers. They were from one of Kelvin's mudblood families.
Mudblood.
Paul Kitson was from Merton. So although he had links with the Mags, he was actually from County Durham. And I tell you what, if I've mentioned his name again in these notes, I will have typed it up as Dave Kitson. So if I say Dave Kitson in future, just ignore me. So Paul Kitson gets clattered early on. John Byrne, after 29 minutes, comes really close to an eye-catching goal, which I'm sure he would have loved to have achieved in front of Jack Charlton. Gary Bennett had been involved in the build-up to that one. There's then that's the move that ends with like a close-range volley, which looks every inch to be a goal, but Kevin Poole manages to save it. Sunderland are in really poor form. We'd not won in the last 5. 4 of those had been defeats. But we looked good. We continued in the second half being on the front foot. Bracewell's had a good attempt deflected. There's other chances. There is a breakaway for Leicester, and Paul Kitson lobs Tony Norman. He manages to get a hand on the ball to kind of take some of the pace off it, which gives Kevin Ball the opportunity to rush back and clear the line, clear the ball just before it bobbles over the line. So Leicester are proving dangerous. They had a player for them called Tommy Wright. Now, I hadn't realised this up until now. Tommy Wright is the son of the Tommy Wright that you'd mentioned earlier, Martin, that had played for Sunderland in the late 40s and early 50s and had scored in that floodlit game.
Just on Tommy Wright. So Tommy Wright scored, I'm sure he scored the goals for Oldham in my first ever game at Roker Park. And I remember I was in the family enclosure in the main stand, full well end bit, and away fans could go in with home fans in the family enclosure. Right. So we were sat next to an Oldham fan who was just cheering and chanting for Tommy Wright all game. Tommy Wright scores a couple of goals. We get beat 2-0. I always remember, even to this day, I can hear him shouting and cheering for Tommy Wright. So I always had hatred's too strong a word, but I always had this thing where Tommy Wright was the bane of my life.
It's amazing how those little things stick in your mind, and you will have been to hundreds, maybe thousands of games since then. But yeah, just that one thing that got on your nerves at the time is always stuck.
Exactly right.
But yeah, on this game, if you were at this match, you were probably, well, there you go. You will have been cursing him. However, he did have a couple of half chances and he fluffed them. So this might have been your day of redemption for Tommy Wright. Not only was he a Sunderland, the son of a Sunderland player. When I was just looking at his details there, after retiring from football, he spent a little bit of time in prison. So again, that might cheer you up, Martin. Just chuckling away when you read that in the paper that he'd been sent down for a couple of months or whatever it was. I'm sure you're not petty like that. I am, but
you think too highly of me, Andrew.
Oh, fair dues, fair enough. Right, yes. Prison sentences aside now. Sunderland bring on Colin Pascoe just after the hour mark, and we continue to push. Goodman has a dive and header that hits the side netting. Pascoe himself clips the top of the bar after John Kay had won the ball back. And then in the last few minutes, Don Goodman, it's his home debut, as I say, he scores the only goal of the match. Could you remember the goal, Martin, or is it a bit too vague?
I can see it. I can see it. I think Paul Bracewell lobs a long crossover from the right-hand side to the far post in the Roker end, and Goodman leaps like he could do. He had such a spring on him, and he just jumped up and headed it over the goalkeeper.
That's exactly it. It's a really good goal. I think Bracewell, by this point in the game, it's a bit of a Hail Mary. It's just
it is. He just lumps it in the box, and
just chuck it into the box, see what happens. The header looks fairly simple, but it's a brilliant technique from Don Goodman because the position his body is in and the distance he is from goal, he has to kind of twist in midair and he somehow generates power on it whilst it not being a thumping header either.
Yeah.
It's a peculiar one, but it was a really good goal. It's exactly what you need in a situation like that. It's exactly what you need if you're a new striker trying to, make a good impression on your new supporters. And it was a deserved win for us. Leicester were near the top. We'd started the day in 19th place, but we played as if we were one of the stronger teams in the division. It lifted us up a couple of places in the league, and it really did give us a much-needed boost. John Byrne afterwards is absolutely thrilled. He's the one who goes in front of the press and is interviewed. He just can see nothing but good things from the partnership of him and Goodman up front. He's buzzing. It's a good weekend for sporting fans from the town in general. That night at Croatley Leisure Centre, the Sunderland Chiefs ice hockey team beat Oxford City Stars. They beat them 6-5, despite being 4-0 down at one point. Then, on the Sunday, back at Croatley Leisure Centre, the basketball team by this point are called Sunderland Saints. They beat Cheshire Jets 73-68. And the reason I mention those results is, like the football team, those other two clubs had been really struggling. I think the ice hockey team and the basketball team prior to that weekend hadn't won a game all season.
Yeah. Right.
Sunderland had been dreadful at the time, and yet we've all had these slow starts, but we've all come back this weekend. You could tell there was definitely something up with the basketball team, because I think this is quite rare for basketball. During the game, it descended into a full-blown fight. Like, we're talking proper punches being traded and like a real rumble. The top scorer for Sunderland was a lad called Ken Nottage, who played a lot for Sunderland basketball over the years and was one of their better teams, one of their better players. He was dismissed, and it was a proper, things really did kick off at the Leisure Centre that day. However, the results all contributed to improving the mood. Back to the football, though, Goodman doesn't score another goal until after Dennis Smith is gone. There's this whole bad feeling around the club, and I think you were touching upon it earlier. Just the mood wasn't happy, was it, Martin? I mean, Sunderland fans at the time, I think we loved a referendum because it's all done on social media now. It's all Twitter opinions and what have you. But if you had an opinion to express back in the day, you had to wave a red card or put a cross in a box. So before the game, there was a fanzine. Now, I don't know which one it was. There was a fanzine.
I think it was Love Supreme.
Was it Love Supreme?
I think so, yeah.
Well, I mean, even by that point, they were probably the most established of the fanzines, I think.
Well, and it's interesting when you kind of look back at that era, because fanzines were relatively new, weren't they? They were, the whole perspective of fans having a voice had previously been confined to the letters pages of the Football Echo, like we've talked about before. And football fanzines had just started to emerge. And we had a few of them, didn't we? We had a few different fanzines. I remember Wise Men Say being out, and there was a Love Supreme, obviously, and a few others at the time. Mm-hmm. And some were more controversial than others. I think at the time, a Love Supreme was really the most popular one. It was the voice of the fans, because that was the only way that fans could really get their opinion published to any extent. So I think what you're going to go on to talk about, it's really hard to overstate now how influential this is, because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have mass media, we didn't have social media for everybody to have their opinion on all sorts of stuff. The fanzine was the gauge of supporters' opinion. And, if one person at the fanzine decides, right, we're going to run this referendum, it puts so much pressure on the club as a whole. It creates the pressure almost. And I would suggest that if this was 5 years earlier, obviously this doesn't happen. I think Dennis Smith gets much more time. But I think this contributed to him going, because when you actually look at the results, and look, the results weren't great at all, but, we've beaten Leicester. We go on to beat Portsmouth the week after. Then we lose a couple of away games, whilst he's still betting in for 3 or 4 players who he signed for big money. And then the pressure builds and he goes. But I think it's hard to see, when you look back on it from today's perspective, how big this referendum thing is. Because if it happens today, it's just one of a number of different things that are going on, a number of different things that are talked about, a number of different opinions are given. This held so much power at the time, and it's kind of unlike anything that you've kind of seen before or you see subsequently, because that's kind of been dispersed.
Yeah, Martin, that genuinely fascinates me, and I'm pleased you knew which fanzine it was, because the Echo refers to it, but are clearly not impressed. Now, I don't know if they're panicking because fanzines, maybe they're worried, are going to start taking some of the readership or something. But Jeff's story was you had to read between the lines. He didn't come out and flat out say it, but he felt that the ballot was quite divisive and was causing angst that didn't need to be caused.
No, it is.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
I remember voting. I remember before the match voting in this referendum, because obviously I'm not sure if we said it was, do you want Dennis Smith to stay or to go? So, and again, it's that shift in power where the fans, or the fanzine in this case, is saying, do you want to stay or go? It's not anything else. It's very black or white. And it is decisive. I can't recall how it was phrased. And I can't remember if it was, is Dennis Smith the man to take Sunderland forward, or whatever it was. But I seem to think it was very simple. Do you want him to stay or go? And yes, my recollection and my view on looking at it with through the passages of time would align with what Jeff Story had said at the time, where it was a really decisive thing and it caused unnecessary pressure on the club, and it had that groundswell of opinion. I can remember, obviously, the referendum got carried out before the game, right? So this result didn't. I don't know if they got votes after the game, but I certainly remember it taking place before the game. And you mentioned Colin Pascoe coming on as sub for Peter Davenport. I was in the Fulwell end that day. There were boos at that substitution. He got booed onto the field, and it wasn't necessarily Pascoe being booed. It was Dennis Smith doing something that got booed, because this feeling had just been carried. And you look at Dennis Smith and the job he'd done at Sunderland in the 4 years before that. It was an astronomically good job with no money, no backing, and there's not enough evidence on the field as to why this feeling came around, this groundswell of feeling came about by December. Yes, we'd had a bad start to the season. Yes, we'd sold Marco, but he'd reinvested the money. I remember you talking about Marco's departure. It wasn't a universal thing going, oh shit, we shouldn't have sold him. It was kind of quite going, oh, maybe it was the time to cash in, and maybe it was the time he'd lost his way. He needed to change. We could improve the squad. And I do think when you look back on it, this incident, this day, actually changed the course of history for Dennis Smith at Sunderland.
Well, honestly, this genuinely fascinates me, Martin, and I could pick your brains about this for hours yet. Because as I say, at this point, I was still new to Sunderland. My Sunderland news either came from the Echo, which was, it was. I don't mean this to be disparaging of fanzines, but they were professional journalists, so there was a certain style about how they wrote, and official club publications. Me dad wasn't into football, me mum wasn't. They very kindly took me to games, but I wasn't I was missing out on a lot of this angst. I just read the programmes and the echoes and was just under the impression that Sunderland were the best team in the world. And that was it. And if you played for Sunderland, you were the best player in the world. A Love Supreme, in particular for me, in later years, was one of the first things where I started to then appreciate not everything's perfect. You know, like when the gold cards came out, my dad got a Sunderland gold card with his name on so he could take me to games, and I was over the moon. I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. But then you read A Love Supreme and there's fans saying these membership schemes have problems and they don't like the way the club are administering things. So A Love Supreme did have a important part in voicing the side of the club. It also helped that it was put together very well. It was nicely done,
It was great. I used to love buying Love Supreme and used to buy it every time it came out, every month it came out. It had a collection as big as the programme collection for a few seasons of the fanzines.
Yeah. I bought other fanzines at the time, but I was too young to really appreciate them, and things like It's the Hope I Can't Stand and An Easy One for Norman were a bit more rough around the edges, and I just was too young at the time to interpret them. Whereas A Love Supreme, I don't know if me saying this is going to see their sales plummet, but it has a lot to answer for me getting so involved in Sunderland. It was a big part as a young kid, learning about the club and learning about the culture and the fans. It was a big part. But the original point is that them doing this ballot was very controversial. I don't know how the results were announced. I mean, it's not like now when it's a Twitter poll and you find out easily. I don't know if somebody was standing at the back of the Fulwell end on a soapbox shouting through a rolled up piece of newspaper or something.
Speaker's corner.
I don't think A Love Supreme had the mayor acting as a returning officer for this ballot. But Martin, I don't know if you remember, they weren't the only supporters who were out and about that day. The print article I've touched upon earlier is referring to the founding of a trust called the Roker Supporters Trust. Do you remember them from the time?
I remember hearing about them. I don't quite know what they did or what came of them.
Well, their focus was about this whole potential ground improvement or ground move that was being talked about. So Love Supreme, apparently it was very close, but the majority voted in favour of Smith staying at the club. Whereas the Roker Supporters Trust were handing out leaflets telling fans about what their agenda was and what they wanted. They were focusing heavily on where Sunderland were going to play games. So this is what I'm saying about Sunderland fans at the time must have loved a ballot or a referendum, because they were pushing for the club to ask fans to vote on proposals to move ground. Now, I clearly remember at the time that being explained to me, that people were unhappy with the way the club worded that referendum. But it seems to me any poor soul trying to get in the queue for the game was trying to dodge all the people handing them flyers and leaflets with, what's your opinion on the team? What's your opinion on the club? So the mood was really down, as you say, Martin. It was a pivotal day in what had already been a pivotal couple of years. We win. That is a huge boost that everybody needed. But as you've said, by the end of December, Smith's gone. Now, I was at a point then as a fan, I didn't even know managers could get sacked, because I was so new to football. I was like, what do you mean Dennis Smith's not the manager? Dennis Smith's always been the manager of Sunderland. He's the manager of the football team I'm falling in love with. I don't understand what you're telling us. So I was obviously very confused as a young lad. But for fans like yourself who were going more regularly then, Martin, and yourself, Kelvin. It was a real time of debate. There was a lot of things that were not right with the club, and boy, we needed that win just to stop the mood boiling over. Were you at the game, Kelvin?
I was, and because I remember the two games. That's what I remember about them is we had 2 wins on the trot, and it did feel like, to me, like that's actually what Smithy all he needed was a couple of wins to buy him the time to sort of re-galvanize the team, re-galvanize himself a little bit as well. I did think, I mean, one of the things I thought, and I tried to think, was that a hindsight thing, or was that something you remember at the time? And I always remember looking at him, and what I can't remember was it the Leicester game or the Portsmouth game? And I just thought he looked worn out. He looked done, and I actually felt for him as a human being. I think standing, and I remember what I was going to say to you was in terms of the fanzines, I can remember being absolutely infuriated about the line that the fanzine, and I think it was the Love Supreme, was taken. I thought they're playing rough and loose and fast with people's jobs, there's not a lot. I didn't feel at the time, without remembering too much of the detail, I didn't feel at the time like they were considering everything in the round, and I'd usually say to you that I used to think I was quite a radical sort of person, but I can remember being like reading it and thinking, what the hell, what are they deliberately trying to like sabotage the club almost, and that wasn't feeling that there wasn't anything wrong. It was being able to see that things weren't right, but was this the kind of thing, here we go again, the revolving door of, a manager who never gets to see the job through because that usually in the past you would say it would be the chairman didn't have the patience to hang on in there. What I remember is as well was having the biggest argument and being as close to fisticuffs with one of our own fans and I think it was that Leicester game coming out of the ground, and this guy had been going on and on behind me, and it had been like earworm in my lug, and I remember just telling him to shut up, and the next thing was, there's a muckle, there's a little bit of a standoff, and and it was, feelings were running quite high, I think, and there was just a sense of, I didn't mind that people were trying to express a view. I just always felt like it's not black and white.
Yeah.
It's like, should Dennis Smith go or should he stay? Is that a way to make a decision on, Now, if you'd said, should Laurie McMenemy go or stay, I said, get the bugger going, do you know what I mean? It's all about context, really, isn't it? About everything in the round. And I felt that this wasn't the time for that kind of, playing fast and loose with the club, and so much going on, including we had the ground, the future of the ground. We had this idea of the Premiership and and this feeling that we were losing touch, and the feeling like the actual team just wasn't, the caliber of the team wasn't good enough, and everything that was going on up the road as well, percolating away in the background, So I felt there was a lot of like things bearing down on us as fans, and then this feeling that, I'm going to blame A Love Supreme for everything. I've really enjoyed some of that stuff since then, but I remember at the time feeling, oh no, this isn't.
Yeah.
That's not going to help. That's not going to sort anything out. Was my feeling. I wasn't alone in feeling like that.
I remember
there were other
I
people.
remember my dad wasn't happy at all. I remember talking before that game, and he was really unhappy that this whole thing was going on. Just didn't think it was right or the right time.
It's interesting because fanzines were given a voice to fans that previously didn't have it. And yeah, the letters page in the sports echo or the football echo, which changed names a few times, was probably your best outlet. But I dare say a lot of the harder hitting letters were either edited or just not printed at all.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult. Is it the fanzine, like what came first, the disgruntlement or the fanzines? It's really tricky, and you could have a massive debate about that. I mean, you could argue as well what we're doing now is as a result of fanzines. We're
I
think
amazing. I think fanzines were brilliant. I think back in the day, especially before you had that mass media and the mass access to media, fanzines were innovative. They were given a different voice, a different type of voice. There was some really funny ones, some really quirky ones, some more serious ones. And, there's a cynical part of you as well from a business perspective. All of these fanzines have got to sell copies to make money, to pay for the print and all that sort of stuff. They're not going to sell many copies by sitting on the fence with things. So a lot of the times they've got to take a stance. And whether people agree or disagree vehemently, they're going to buy the copy to have a look and see what people are saying.
Kelvin's exactly right, Martin. You're exactly right. And Kelvin's exactly right in something he was suggesting earlier. A lot of these issues, there's a lot of subtleties and different points of view, and it's very hard to express that in a 600-word article or whatever. So, a lot of these things end up being melted down. I mean, you get it with politics and every other aspect of life now. It's all boils down to a yes or no. Nobody's got time or space or inclination for a reasoned debate of, well, actually, I would be a yes, but I could understand a no or whatever. One thing I will just say, if you don't mind, lads, and thank you for listening to me. I could go on forever and ever about this period. This game that I refer to, and I think the Grimsby one you were talking about earlier, Martin, the full game footage of the Leicester match is on that YouTube channel, Sunderland AFC TV. And it starts with the players running out, the lucky mascots having a couple of shots at Tony Norman in goal, probably testing out his dodgy groin, seeing if he's going to be up to the game. Maybe that was the late fitness test that he passed. And in the background, just the first few bars, the first few strains of "We Will Rock You," pumping out. That just took me back to that era. So if anyone gets a chance, you can watch the full game of that. I think as well, it's certainly used to. It might not have it now. I think that had the full time tease coverage of the build up to kick off, Martin, and the will the game start? Will it be called off? And then 6 minutes basically of some poor cameraman trying to just like constantly wipe his lens clean to let people see the footage. And if your Sunday League manager spotted you, his TV must have had better definition than mine, because when I watched it back at the time originally, you couldn't see what was going on, man. It was just a farce.
Hey,
but
it could have been a double bluff, couldn't it? And I fell for it.
I'd
never ever considered that. Anyway, going back to, he certainly has. It wasn't for the first time, it wasn't for the last. Going back to the vote, the vote went in favour of Dennis Smith, 57 to 43. And when Dennis was informed of that outcome, he asked if anybody knew how Bob Murray had voted. So that that shows you where Dennis was thinking. Anyway, thank you very much, Andrew and Kelvin. It's been a pleasure as always. And Andrew, do you have a quiz to set us up for next week?
Yes, I do. I've given everyone plenty of homework. I've given them a load of articles to dig out that have been written by us over the years. I've told them to go and watch full 90 minutes footage of games that happened 30 odd years ago. And if they're still not sick of trawling through the archives, next week's episode will cover the 15th to the 21st of December. It's getting close to Christmas. 17th of December, 1994, so still in that favourite 90s period of mine. We played Bristol City at Roker. The game finished 2-0. Lee Haway got both goals. Yous are both, I can see on your faces, you're trying to remember whether you were at that game as well or not.
Oh, I was.
Say again?
I was definitely at that game.
Yeah.
It's actually a song that's floating through my head right now, Andrew. But yeah,
what song?
I have some family connections, I suspect.
No, I'm not.
Do you not know that one? Oh dear.
Lee Haway.
Oh, of course, man.
Come on, man.
Kelvin, I thought you meant family connections to you. Sorry.
Oh, right.
Yes. Lee Haway. Who knows? This could have been the game where that famous chant started. And Kelvin, knowing you, it was probably you that kicked it off to begin with, with that foul mouth of yours. Right. Yes, the question. There was a Sunderland player making his final appearance for the club that day. The question is, who was that player?
Oh.
Martin's got it already, hasn't he?
I think I know. I think I know because I think there was a player in the opposition side who had a connection to what subsequently happened. But there we go. So thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Kelvin, as always. And thank you to everybody for listening. And we'll be back tomorrow to start all of the build-up to some little game that we've got on Sunday. And, of course, we'll have another episode on this week for you at some point next week. But until then, it's goodbye from us.
Podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Sports Social Podcast Network, the biggest voices in sport. Let's take a look at some of the lineup. For the love of rugby.
What were you more nervous for? First cap or opening, Strictly?
Honestly, opening Strictly.
Not the top 20.
The decision to sack Wilder and replace him with anyone was a massive risk that the ownership took.
Under the cosh.
I got a text and he was like, you need to get me in because I bullied your centre-halves and made them look like kids.
All on Europe's biggest sport podcast network. Find your next favourite sport podcast. Search Sports Social Podcast Network and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Verified comparison at content.sport-social.co.uk/comparison.